I never knew my grandfather. For 23 years, I lived without knowing his name, his face, or the sound of his voice. I grew up behind the gray walls of Mountain View Children's Home in Charleston, West Virginia, where the only family I had were the other forgotten kids and the tired social workers who rotated through our lives like seasons. My name is Julia Morgan, and on a cold March morning in 2015, I walked out of that place for the last time with everything I owned in a backpack that had seen better days. $58 in my pocket, 3 changes of clothes, a photo of a woman I barely remembered, and a chisel. The chisel was old. Old. The kind of old that speaks of decades of honest work. The wooden handle was smooth from years of being gripped by calloused hands, worn down in the exact shape of someone's palm. The blade was still sharp, kept that way by someone who understood that a tool deserved respect. Carved into the handle, so deep the letters would never fade, were the initials DM and the year 1962, and DM and them. Pastor Frank Coleman pressed it into my hands on my last day, his wrinkled fingers trembling slightly as he held mine. He was 78 years old, had run Mountain View for 40 years, and in all that time I had never seen him cry. But that morning, standing in the narrow hallway that smelled of industrial cleaner and institutional cooking, his eyes were wet. "Your mother left this with you when she brought you here," he said. His voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from carrying secrets for too long. "She said when you were old enough, when you were ready to leave this place, I should give it to you. She said it would lead you home." I stared at the chisel, feeling its weight in my hand. It was heavier than it looked. "Home," I repeated. The word felt strange in my mouth. I had never had a home. Mountain View was the only address I had ever known, and it was not home. It was survival. It was waiting. It was watching other kids get adopted while you learned to stop hoping. Pastor Frank reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. On it, in careful handwriting that had faded but was still legible, were the words Morgan Workshop, Route 9, Millbrook, West Virginia. "That is where she said you came from," he told me. "I do not know anything more than that. Your mother, she only told me her first name, Sarah. She was very young, very scared, and she promised she would come back for you." He paused, and I knew how that sentence ended. She never did. I took the paper, folded it carefully, and put it in my pocket next to the $58 that represented every penny I had saved from 3 years of after-school jobs. I looked at Pastor Frank, this man who had been the closest thing to family I had ever known, and I tried to find words that mattered. "Thank you," I said. It was not enough, but it was all I had. He pulled me into a hug, brief and awkward the way it always was between us. Then he stepped back and looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. "Be careful, Julia," he said. "Sometimes the past is buried for a reason." I walked out into this March morning, into air that was cold enough to sting my lungs, and I did not look back. Looking back was a luxury I had never been able to afford. I had learned early that you keep moving forward, even when you do not know where forward leads. The Greyhound bus station was 6 blocks away. I had walked this route 100 times in my mind, planning for this day since I turned 18. But life at Mountain View had taught me patience, had taught me to wait, to save, to prepare. So I had stayed until 23, working every job I could find, squirreling away every dollar until I had enough to leave with something more than just hope. Charleston in March was gray. The sky hung low and heavy, pregnant with rain that had not yet decided to fall. The streets were wet from the night before, reflecting the anemic streetlights and the red glow of traffic signals. I passed the diner where I had worked weekend breakfast shifts for 2 years, the laundromat where I had spent countless hours reading library books while watching clothes tumble, the corner store where the owner, a Korean man named Mr. Kim, had always given me an extra piece of fruit with my purchase because he said I was too skinny. I did not stop at any of these places. Goodbyes had a weight I did not want to carry. The bus station was nearly empty at 6 in the morning. Just me, a woman with 2 small children who looked exhausted in a way that went bone deep, and an old man sleeping on a bench with all his possessions in a shopping cart beside him. I bought a ticket to Millbrook with $42, leaving me with $16 to my name and no plan beyond finding this Morgan Workshop. The bus would not leave for another hour. I sat on a hard plastic chair and pulled out the chisel again, turning it over in my hands, studying every detail. Whoever had made this had loved their work. You could see it in the precision of the carving, in the way the handle fit perfectly in my palm, in the care that had kept the blade sharp all these years. I had always been good with my hands. At Mountain View, I had been the one the maintenance man, old Joe, called when something needed fixing. He had taught me to use basic tools, to see how things fit together, to understand that everything built by human hands followed certain rules. Wood expands and contracts with humidity. Metal fatigues over time. Every joint needs to account for stress and movement. These lessons had felt like the only education that mattered, more real than anything I learned in the underfunded public school, where teachers looked at foster kids with a mixture of pity and low expectations. I had spent hours in the basement workshop at Mountain View, a dingy space with fluorescent lights that flickered and concrete walls that wept moisture. Old Joe was 60-something, missing 2 fingers on his left hand from an accident he never talked about, and he spoke more to his tools than to people. But he let me work beside him, let me learn by watching, by trying, by failing and trying again. "You got the touch," he told me once, watching me sand down a rough edge on a bookshelf I was repairing. "Most people, they fight the wood. You listen to it." I did not know what he meant then. I was 16, angry at the world, convinced that nothing I did mattered because I was just another foster kid who would age out with nothing. But I kept coming back to that workshop, kept picking up tools, kept learning. It was the only place I felt like I was building something instead of just waiting for time to pass. Now, sitting in this bus station with a chisel that belonged to someone named DM, I wondered if that pull toward working with my hands had been something deeper, something inherited, something in the blood. The bus rumbled to life at 7:15. I climbed aboard, found a window seat near the back, and pressed my forehead against the cold glass as Charleston disappeared behind me. The city gave way to suburbs, then to stretches of forest broken by the occasional gas station or roadside diner. West Virginia in early spring was a study in gray and brown, the trees still bare, waiting for warmth that felt a long way off. An old man across the aisle watched me for a while, then leaned over. "You heading to Millbrook?" he asked. His voice was rough, weathered by cigarettes and years. I nodded. "Not much there," he said. "Couple thousand people, maybe less now. Used to be a coal town back in the day, but the mines closed 30 years ago. These days it is mostly folks who were born there and never left." He paused, studying me. "You got family there?" "I do not know," I said honestly. "I am looking for someone." He grunted, settling back in his seat. "Millbrook is the kind of place where everybody knows everybody. You ask around, you will find who you are looking for, assuming they want to be found." He pulled a worn baseball cap over his eyes and was snoring within minutes. I turned back to the window, watching the landscape roll by, feeling the chisel heavy in my jacket pocket. The bus made 2 stops before Millbrook, letting off passengers in small towns that looked like they were barely holding on. By the time we pulled into Millbrook, it was almost 10:30, and a weak sun had broken through the clouds, doing nothing to warm the air. Millbrook was exactly what the old man had described. One main street, maybe 4 blocks long, lined with brick buildings that dated back to better days. A pharmacy with a faded awning, a hardware store with a hand-painted sign, a diner called Maggie's Place with checkered curtains in the windows, a church with a white steeple and a sign out front announcing Sunday services. Beyond the main street, houses spread out in a grid, most of them modest single-story structures with small yards and pickup trucks in the driveways. Mountains rose on all sides, covered in bare trees that would be green in a few months, but now just looked skeletal against the gray sky. The whole town sat in a valley, sheltered and isolated, the kind of place where everyone knew when a stranger arrived. I got off the bus with my backpack and stood on the sidewalk, suddenly very aware that I had no plan beyond finding Route 9 in a workshop that might not even exist anymore. The bus pulled away, leaving me in silence broken only by the distant sound of a dog barking and the mechanical hum of the pharmacy's sign. "Route 9, I said to no one. I looked up and down the street, searching for someone to ask. An older woman came out of the pharmacy, carrying a small paper bag. She looked at me with the frank curiosity of someone who knew every face in town and was seeing a new one. She was maybe 70, with white hair tucked under a knit cap and a winter coat that had been repaired more than once. "Excuse me," I called out. "Can you tell me how to get to Route 9? She stopped, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Route 9 runs north out of town," she said. "About half a mile up Main Street, you will see the turnoff." "What are you looking for out there?" Morgan Workshop, I said. Her expression changed. Something flickered across her face, recognition mixed with something else. Something like sadness. Morgan Workshop, she repeated softly. That place has been closed for 5 years now. Not since David died. The name hit me like a physical thing. David. DM David Morgan. Did you know him? I asked, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. Everyone knew David, she said. He built half the houses in this town. She looked at me more carefully now, her gaze moving from my face to my worn jacket to the backpack at my feet. Why are you looking for the workshop? I pulled out the chisel, held it up so she could see the initials carved into the handle. My mother left this for me, I said. I think David Morgan might have been my grandfather. The woman's hand went to her mouth. Her eyes filled with tears so quickly it startled me. Oh, my Lord, she whispered. Sarah's daughter. You are Sarah's daughter. Hearing a stranger say my mother's name like that, like she was a real person who had walked these streets and been known and remembered, made something crack open inside my chest. You knew my mother, I asked? The woman nodded, stepping closer. Honey, everyone in this town knew Sarah Morgan. She was David's only child. She left here when she was just 16, and it broke David's heart. He looked for her for years, but she was gone like smoke. And then he died, and we all thought that was the end of the Morgan line. She reached out and touched my arm gently. But here you are. I did not know what to say. I stood there on the sidewalk of this small town I had never heard of until this morning, holding a chisel that belonged to a grandfather I had never met, talking to a woman whose name I did not even know. And I felt unmoored, untethered, like everything I thought I understood about myself was shifting beneath my feet. The workshop is about 3 miles up Route 9, the woman said. Big 2-story building. You cannot miss it. It has been sitting empty since David passed. She hesitated, then added, but there is someone there most days, Marcus Webb. He worked with David for 35 years. If anyone can tell you about your grandfather, it is Marcus. She gave me directions, offered me a ride, which I declined because I needed to walk, needed to move, needed to think. Then she pressed a piece of paper into my hand with her phone number and name. Ellen Patterson. Call me if you need anything, she said. Welcome home, Julia. I walked north out of town, following Route 9 as it curved into the hills. The road was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass, and it climbed steadily upward. Houses became sparse, then disappeared altogether. The forest closed in on both sides, pine and oak and maple still waiting for spring. I thought about my mother, 16 years old and pregnant, walking away from this town, from her father, from everything she knew. I thought about what kind of fear or desperation or anger it took to leave and never come back. I thought about the fact that she had kept this chisel all those years, had brought it with her when she left me at Mountain View, had told Pastor Frank to give it to me when I was ready. Ready for what? Ready to find out I came from a family that fell apart? Ready to discover that I had a grandfather who died without knowing I existed? Ready to walk into a town full of people who knew my mother when I did not even have a clear memory of her face? The workshop appeared around a bend in the road. Ellen Patterson had been right. I could not miss it. It was a 2-story building, wood construction with a metal roof and large windows on the ground floor. The wood siding was weathered to a soft gray, but the structure looked solid, well built, the kind of building that would stand for another 50 years if left alone. A hand-painted sign over the main door read, Morgan Workshop, in faded green letters. Next to the building was a gravel lot with a rusted pickup truck that had not moved in years, grass growing up around its tires. Everything about the place spoke of absence, of work stopped mid-sentence, of tools put down with the intention of picking them up tomorrow, and tomorrow never coming. I stood in the road for a long moment, just looking. Then I walked up to the main door and tried the handle. Locked. I walked around the building, peering through windows. Inside, I could see workbenches, tools hanging on pegboards, stacks of lumber, sawdust coating every surface. It looked like whoever had worked here had just stepped out for lunch and never returned. Around the back of the building, I found a man. He was maybe 49 or 50, with hair gone mostly gray and a face that had seen weather and hard work. He wore canvas work pants and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up despite the cold. He was bent over a sawhorse, sanding a piece of oak with long practiced strokes. He looked up when he heard my footsteps on the gravel. His eyes went to my face, then dropped to the chisel I was still holding in my hand. His entire body went still. Where did you get that? He asked. His voice was quiet, careful. My mother left it for me, I said. When she left me at a children's home in Charleston 23 years ago, it has these initials. DM 1962. I was told it would lead me home. I paused, then asked, Are you Marcus Webb? He set down his sandpaper very slowly, very deliberately. Then he walked toward me, his eyes never leaving the chisel in my hand. When he was close enough, he reached out and I let him take it. He turned it over, examining it from every angle, running his thumb over the carved initials. David made this the first year he opened the workshop, Marcus said. It was the first tool he ever carved his mark into. He never let anyone use it but him. He paused, looking up at me. Your mother took this when she left? I guess so, I said. I do not really know. I was 6 months old when she left me. I do not remember her. Marcus handed the chisel back to me, and I saw his hand was shaking. What is your name? He asked. Julia Morgan. He closed his eyes, and I watched his face work through a series of emotions I could not quite read. Pain, regret, something that might have been relief. When he opened his eyes again, they were wet. Jesus Christ, he said softly. David had a granddaughter, all those years, and he had a granddaughter. Did you know my mother? I asked. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Know her? I watched that girl grow up. I started working for David when Sarah was 7 years old. I saw her every day for 9 years, until the day she left and broke her father's heart. He gestured toward the workshop. Come inside. If you want to know about your family, I will tell you everything. He unlocked the door with a key he wore on a chain around his neck. The door opened with a creak of hinges that had not moved in years, and the smell hit me immediately. Sawdust and wood oil and something else. Something I could not name, but recognize deep in my bones. The smell of a place where good work had been done. Marcus flipped a light switch and fluorescent bulbs flickered to life overhead, illuminating the interior. It was bigger than it looked from outside. The ground floor was one large, open space, maybe 40 feet by 60 feet, with workbenches along the walls, a table saw in the center, racks of lumber stacked against the back wall. Tools hung in neat rows on pegboards, each one in its designated spot. The floor was wood, worn smooth by decades of feet, and covered in a fine layer of sawdust that muted our footsteps. This was David's kingdom, Marcus said. He spent more time here than he did at home. He walked over to one of the workbenches and brushed sawdust off a stool. Sit, I will make coffee. Then I will tell you about your grandfather. He disappeared into a small room at the back, and I heard water running, the clink of mugs, the gurgle of an old coffee maker. I sat on the stool and looked around, trying to imagine a man I had never met moving through this space, picking up these tools, building things. On the wall above the main workbench, I saw a series of framed photographs. I stood and walked over to look at them. The photos were old, faded, but still clear enough. They showed various houses, each one with a handwritten label beneath. Coleman Residence, 1963. Webb Family Home, 1975. Chen House, 1979. The labels went on, a chronological record of every house David Morgan had built. There were 47 of them. Marcus came back with 2 mugs of black coffee. He handed me one and stood beside me, looking at the photographs. Every house David built, he photographed and put up here, he said. It was his way of keeping score. Not of money, David never made much money. He charged too little and gave too much away. But he kept score of what he built, what he left behind. Why did my mother leave, I asked. Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring at the photographs. Then he sighed and sat down on his stool, cradling his coffee mug in both hands. That is a complicated story, he said, and not a happy one. I have nowhere else to be, I said. He nodded slowly. All right, he said, I will tell you, but you need to understand something first. David Morgan was a good man, not a perfect man, but a good one. What happened with Sarah, it was not because he did not love her. It was because he loved her too much and showed it all wrong. He took a sip of his coffee, gathering his thoughts, and then he began to tell me the story of my family. The story of how everything fell apart. Sarah was born in 1969, Marcus said. David was 37, his wife Rebecca was 35. They had been trying for a baby for 10 years, and when Sarah finally came, they thought she was a miracle. But Rebecca died in childbirth. Complications. In those days, in a small hospital like Millbrook had, some things could not be fixed. So David was left with a newborn daughter and no wife. He was devastated, But he did what men of his generation did. He put his head down and worked. He had opened this workshop just 7 years earlier, and it was starting to do well. People trusted him. He built good houses, charged fair prices, showed up on time, and finished on schedule. So he worked, and he raised Sarah, and for 16 years they were all each other had. Marcus paused, looking at me. "You look like her," he said. "Like Sarah. Same dark hair, same gray eyes." David used to say Sarah looked like her mother, but I always thought she looked like him. Stubborn chin. That way of looking at you like she could see right through whatever you were trying to hide. He took another drink of coffee. Sarah was smart. Really smart. She did well in school, but what she really loved was art. Drawing, painting, anything creative. David did not understand it. To him, work meant making something useful, something you could live in or sit on or use. Art was decoration, frivolous. He wanted Sarah to learn practical skills, maybe go to community college, get a degree in business or accounting, something that would lead to stable employment. But Sarah had other ideas. She wanted to go to art school in New York. She had talent, real talent, and her teachers told her she could get scholarships. David said no, absolutely not. New York was too far, too expensive, too dangerous for a girl from a small town. They fought about it all through Sarah's junior year of high school. And then Thomas Kane showed up. Marcus set down his coffee mug and rubbed his face with both hands. Thomas was 19, a sophomore at an art school in Pennsylvania. He came to Millbrook in the summer of 1985 because his professor had assigned a project about rural Appalachia. Thomas was supposed to spend 6 weeks sketching and painting the landscape, the people, the dying coal towns. He rented a room above the pharmacy and set up an easel on Main Street. Sarah was 16, frustrated with her father. Desperate to escape this town she felt was suffocating her. And here was Thomas Kane, this boy from the city who talked about art and freedom and following your passion. They fell in love the way teenagers do, fast and complete and without any thought for consequences. David hated Thomas on sight, partly because Thomas represented everything David distrusted, art and impracticality and big city ideas. But mostly because David could see that Sarah was pulling away from him, choosing this boy over her own father. He forbade Sarah from seeing Thomas, which of course only made her more determined. I could see where this was going. I set down my coffee, my hands wrapped around the chisel in my lap. "She got pregnant," I said. Marcus nodded. December of 1985. Sarah was 4 months into her senior year. She told David in January. And David, he lost his mind. Not in a violent way. David never raised a hand to anyone. But he was so angry, so disappointed, so terrified of what people would say. He told Sarah she had shamed the family, thrown away her future, destroyed everything he had worked to build for her. And then he made the mistake that cost him everything. He gave her an ultimatum. He told Sarah she could not marry Thomas, could not keep the baby, had to finish high school and put this whole mess behind her. He said if she chose Thomas over her family, she could leave. He thought she would back down. Thought she would see reason. "She did not," I said quietly. "She did not," Marcus confirmed. Sarah packed a bag that night and left with Thomas. David found out the next morning when he went to wake her for school and found her room empty. Just a note on her bed that said she was sorry, but she had to go and please do not look for me. Marcus stood and walked over to the window, looking out at the gray March afternoon. David came to the workshop that morning, and I found him sitting right here at this bench, crying. I had worked for him for 11 years by then, and I had never seen him cry. He told me what happened, and I could see it was killing him. He said he had done the right thing, that Sarah would thank him someday when she realized he had saved her from ruining her life. But he did not believe it, not really, because that very afternoon, he started looking for her. Called every number he could think of, drove to Thomas Kane's apartment in Pennsylvania, asked everyone in town if they had heard anything. Sarah and Thomas had vanished completely. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "So he did try to find her," I said. Marcus turned back to me, and his face was heavy with old sorrow. "He tried for years, Julia. Hired private investigators, called hospitals, checked every database he could access. But Sarah did not want to be found. She had made her choice, and part of that choice was cutting David out of her life completely." He walked back to the workbench and opened a drawer. From it, he pulled out a leather-bound notebook, old and worn, He set it in front of me. David kept a journal, Marcus said. Not every day, just when things were weighing on him. He wrote about Sarah, about trying to find her, about regretting what he said. He never showed this to anyone, but after he died, I found it here in his desk. I think he meant for someone to find it someday. I stared at the journal, almost afraid to touch it. This is my grandfather's handwriting, I thought. His thoughts. The closest I would ever come to knowing him. Read it, Marcus said gently. It will help you understand. I opened the journal to the first page. The handwriting was precise, careful. The script of someone who had learned to write in an era when penmanship mattered. The date at the top read January 15th, 1986. I began to read, and David Morgan's voice spoke to me across 29 years, telling me about the day he lost his daughter and how it felt to watch your child walk out the door and know it was your fault they were leaving. The first entry in David Morgan's journal was dated January 15th, 1986, written in the careful script of a man who thought about his words before committing them to paper. I sat at the workbench where my grandfather had spent thousands of hours, surrounded by tools he had touched and wood he had shaped, and I read his confession. Sarah told me today she is pregnant. She is 16 years old. The boy is Thomas Kane, that art student who has been hanging around town all summer. When she said his name, I wanted to drive to wherever he is staying and break every bone in his body. I wanted to hurt him the way he has hurt my daughter, my family, everything I have worked to build. But Sarah screamed at me. She said she loves him. She said they are going to get married, going to raise this baby together, going to move to the city where Thomas can finish art school and she can be free of this suffocating town. Those were her words, suffocating. I have given this girl everything. I raised her alone after Rebecca died. I worked 70-hour weeks to keep a roof over her head and food on the table. I taught her to be responsible, to be practical, to understand that life is not about following your dreams, it is about doing what needs to be done. And now she tells me I have suffocated her. I told her the truth. I told her Thomas Kane is 19 years old with no job, no prospects, nothing but a head full of artistic nonsense and a complete lack of understanding about what it takes to support a family. I told her she will not marry him. She will finish high school. We will figure out what to do about the baby, but she will not throw her life away on a boy who will abandon her the moment things get difficult. She said if I make her choose between him and me, she will choose him. I said then she knows where the door is. I thought she would back down. I thought she would see that I am trying to protect her, that I know more about the world than she does, that I am her father and I have earned the right to make this decision. She packed a bag and left that same night. Marcus found me this morning sitting here in the workshop. I had been here since 3 a.m., unable to sleep, unable to go back into that empty house. He asked what was wrong and I told him. I am 54 years old and I cried in front of my employee like a child who has lost his mother. Marcus said I should go after her, should apologize, should bring her home. But I cannot. If I give in now, I am telling her that threats work, that she can manipulate me by running away. I am her father. I have to stand firm. She will come back when she realizes how hard the world is. She will come back when Thomas Kane shows his true colors and abandons her. She will come back. I have to believe that. I set the journal down, my hand shaking. Marcus was sitting across from me, watching my face. How long did he wait? I asked. How long before he went to look for her? 3 weeks, Marcus said quietly. 3 weeks of David coming to work every day, doing his job, pretending everything was fine. But I could see it eating him alive. He got thinner. He stopped talking unless he had to. He would stand at that window for hours, just staring out like he expected Sarah to come walking up the road any minute. Marcus stood and walked to a filing cabinet against the wall. He pulled open a drawer and removed a folder, thick with papers. Then he came back and set it in front of me. 3 weeks after Sarah left, David hired a private investigator, a man out of Charleston who specialized in finding runaways. Cost David $2,000, which was a lot of money in 1986, especially for a man who was not rich. I opened the folder. Inside were reports typed on onion skin paper, photocopies of official documents, handwritten notes. I scanned through them, seeing my mother's life reduced to a paper trail. Sarah Morgan and Thomas Kane had moved to Pittsburgh. Thomas had enrolled in the Pittsburgh School of Art. They had rented a small apartment in a rough neighborhood. Sarah had gotten a job waitressing at a diner. The investigator's notes painted a picture of two kids trying to make it work and barely surviving. The apartment had roaches. Thomas was struggling in school, his scholarship only covering tuition, not living expenses. Sarah was working 40 hours a week and still not making enough to cover rent and groceries. By April, they were 2 months behind on rent. And then the trail went cold. The last report was dated May 10, 1986. The investigator noted that Sarah Morgan and Thomas Kane had been evicted from their apartment. The landlord said they had left in the middle of the night, owing 3 months' rent, leaving no forwarding address. The investigator had checked with Thomas Kane's school. He had withdrawn. No one knew where they had gone. David paid the investigator to keep looking for another 6 months, Marcus said. But there was nothing to find. Sarah and Thomas had disappeared, could have gone to New York, could have gone to California, could have been anywhere. David spent over $5,000 and got nothing but a folder full of dead ends. Why did she run so hard? I asked. I understood leaving Millbrook, leaving David, but why make it impossible for him to find her? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Because she was ashamed, he finally said. Because she was 16 and pregnant and everything was falling apart, and she could not face coming back here and admitting her father had been right. Pride runs in your family, Julia. It is a Morgan trait, and it has cost every generation something precious. I turned back to the journal, flipping through pages until I found another entry. This one was dated February 10, 1986, almost a month after Sarah had left. I drove to Pittsburgh today. I told Marcus I had business with a lumber supplier, but that was a lie. I went to find Sarah. The investigator gave me the address of the apartment where she is living with Thomas Kane. I sat in my truck across the street for 3 hours. I told myself I would wait until I saw her come out, and then I would talk to her, apologize for the things I said, bring her home. But she never came out. Or maybe she did, and I did not recognize her because it has only been a month, but I am terrified that I have already forgotten what my own daughter looks like. Finally, I got out of the truck and walked to the building. It was a terrible place, Julia. Broken windows, graffiti on the walls, trash piled in the hallways. The kind of place where bad things happen to good people. I stood outside the door of apartment 3B, my hand raised to knock, and I could not do it. What would I say? I am sorry? Come home? I was right about Thomas Kane and you were wrong, and now look where you are? I stood there for 10 minutes and then I walked away. I got back in my truck and I drove home, and I have never felt like more of a coward in my entire life. I am her father. I am supposed to protect her, supposed to keep her safe, and I am letting her live in squalor because I am too proud to admit I made a mistake, because I am too stubborn to be the first one to apologize. Rebecca would be ashamed of me. If my wife were alive, she would tell me to swallow my pride, knock on that door, and bring our daughter home. But Rebecca is not here, and I am doing this alone, and I am making a mess of it. I will go back tomorrow. I will knock on the door. I will bring Sarah home. But I never did. I looked up at Marcus. He did not go back. Marcus shook his head. The next day, David got a call from a client in Beckley who wanted him to build a house. Big job, good money, 3 months of solid work. David took it. He told himself he would go back to Pittsburgh after the job was done, that a few months would not make a difference, that Sarah needed time to realize she had made a mistake. But by the time the job was finished, the investigator had reported that Sarah and Thomas were gone, and David never got another chance. I closed the journal and pushed it away from me. I could not read anymore. Not right now. The weight of all this sadness, all this waste, all these missed chances was crushing me. My grandfather had spent years looking for my mother. My mother had spent years running from my grandfather. And I had spent 23 years not knowing either of them existed. Marcus, I said, my voice rough, tell me about the houses. He looked at me, understanding what I was asking. You want to see what David built. You want to understand him through his work. I nodded. The journal shows me his pain. I want to see what he created. Marcus stood and grabbed a windbreaker from a hook by the door. All right, he said. I will give you the tour, but you need to understand something first. David did not build houses to make money. He built them because it was the only way he knew how to make something right in a world where he had made so much wrong. We took Marcus's truck, an old Ford that had more rust than paint but ran smoothly. He drove us back into town, pointing out houses as we passed. That one, he would say, or that one over there, or the blue one on the corner. Every third or fourth house we passed had been built by David Morgan. The first stop was a small white house with green shutters, a neat yard, and a wheelchair ramp leading to the front door. "This is the Coleman house," Marcus said. "First house David ever built, back in 1963. Pastor Coleman hired him when David was just 31, fresh out of the army, trying to start a business with nothing but a truck and a set of tools." I remembered the photograph in the workshop. "Coleman residence, 1963. "Do they still live here?" I asked. "Pastor Coleman died in 1998, Marcus said. "But his daughter lives here now, takes care of her mother, who is 93 and has Alzheimer's. That ramp, David built that for free in 2005 when Mrs. Coleman had her stroke. Drove over here one Saturday morning with a load of lumber and did not leave until it was finished." We drove on. Marcus showed me a 2-story house with a wraparound porch. "The Webb house," he said with a slight smile. "David built this for me in 1975. I had just gotten married, had a baby on the way, and I had been laid off from the mine. Could not get a loan from any bank because I had no job. David said he would build me a house and I could pay him back $5 a week until we were square. Took me 8 years to pay it off, and David never charged me a penny of interest." I looked at the house, solid and well-maintained, and I thought about a man who would build something that would take 8 years to pay for. That did not make business sense. That was not practical. That was something else. That was faith in another person. That was building the world you wanted to live in, one house at a time. We stopped at a small house on the edge of town, modest but carefully kept. "The Chen family," Marcus said. "They moved here from California in 1979. First Asian family in Millbrook, and people were not kind. No contractor would work for them. David heard about it and showed up at their door, said he would build them a house at cost, not a penny more." "Did people give him trouble for it?" I asked. Marcus nodded. "Lost some business over it. Had people cancel jobs, say they did not want to work with a man who was too friendly with foreigners. David did not care. He said a man's worth is not in the color of his skin, but in whether he keeps his word and treats people fairly. The Chens had cash in hand and needed a house. That was all David needed to know." We drove past more houses. Each one had a story. Each one was evidence of the man David Morgan had been. Not in his words, but in his work. A house built for a widow whose husband had died in the mines. A house built for a veteran who had come home from Vietnam with PTSD and no family. A house built for a single mother with 3 kids who was working 2 jobs and still could not afford rent. By the time we had seen 15 houses, a pattern had emerged. David Morgan built houses for people who needed them, people who had been let down by the system, by their families, by their luck. He did not build mansions for the rich. He built solid, simple houses for people who needed a place to stand. "Marcus," I said as we drove back toward the workshop, "how much money did David make?" "Not much," Marcus admitted. "He charged fair prices, which in David's mind meant barely above cost. He gave away more work than he sold. By the time he died, he had maybe $47,000 in savings. Owned the workshop and the land it sits on, owned his truck, had his tools. That was about it." "So he was not rich," I said. "Not in money," Marcus agreed. "But look around this town, Julia. Half these houses would not exist without David. Families who would have been homeless have roofs over their heads because your grandfather showed up with lumber and a saw and would not take no for an answer when they said they could not pay." We pulled back into the gravel lot at the workshop. The sun was starting to sink toward the mountains, turning the sky shades of orange and purple. Marcus turned off the engine and we sat in silence for a moment. "How did he die?" I asked. Marcus took a breath. "Heart attack, March 2010. He was 78, still working every day, still taking on projects. He was here in the workshop, building a bookshelf for the library. I found him the next morning. He had been dead for maybe 6 hours. The bookshelf was half finished. I felt tears prick my eyes. Did he die alone?" Marcus nodded slowly. "David lived alone, worked alone, died alone. After Sarah left, he never remarried, never even dated as far as I know. He had friends, had people who cared about him, but he kept everyone at arm's length. It was like losing Sarah broke something in him, and he never figured out how to fix it." We got out of the truck, and Marcus unlocked the workshop again. Inside, he flipped on the lights and walked to the filing cabinet. He pulled out another folder, thinner than the first one, and handed it to me. "This is David's will," he said. He had a lawyer draw it up in 2009, a year before he died. I am the executor. I opened the folder. The will was simple, only 3 pages. I scanned through the legal language until I found the relevant section. David Morgan left his entire estate to his heir or heirs to be determined by proof of lineage to the Morgan family. The estate consisted of the workshop, the land it sat on, a truck, his tools, and approximately $47,000 in a savings account. The will specified that whoever inherited the estate should find a wooden box hidden in the workshop. The box contained instructions. "What box?" I asked. Marcus walked over to a support beam in the center of the room. He knelt down and pressed on a floorboard. It popped up, revealing a hollow space beneath. From the space, he pulled out a wooden box, about the size of a shoebox, beautifully made from walnut with dovetail joints and a lid that fit perfectly. He set the box on the workbench. "This," he said. I stared at the box. "David made this?" "Made it in 2009. Spent a month on it, working in the evenings after I went home. I did not know it existed until after he died and I read the will. I reached out and ran my fingers over the wood. It was smooth as glass, the grain carefully matched, the joints so tight you could barely see the seams. This was the work of a master craftsman, someone who understood that the details mattered, that beauty came from precision and patience. "Open it," Marcus said. I lifted the lid. Inside was a folded map, a stack of envelopes, and a letter with my name on it. My name, Julia Morgan, written in David's careful handwriting on an envelope that had been waiting for me for 5 years. I picked up the letter with trembling hands. The envelope was sealed with wax, old-fashioned and formal. I broke the seal and pulled out 2 sheets of paper covered in David's script. The letter was dated March 2010, just days before he died. "To my heir, whoever you are. I am David Morgan, 78 years old, and I am dying. The doctors say my heart is failing. They say I have maybe 6 months if I am lucky. They are wrong. I will not last that long. A man knows when his time is coming, and mine is close. I have no children. That is not entirely true, but it is what I have told everyone for 24 years. The truth is, I had a daughter, Sarah. I drove her away when she needed me most. I gave her an ultimatum when I should have given her understanding. I chose pride over love, and I lost her. I looked for Sarah for 10 years, spent thousands of dollars I could not afford, hired investigators, called hospitals, checked every database I could access. But Sarah did not want to be found. She had made her choice, and that choice was to cut me out of her life completely. In 1998, I got a phone call from a private investigator I had given up on years before. He said he had found something. He said Sarah Morgan had given birth to a baby girl in Charleston, West Virginia, in September 1991. The baby's name was Julia Morgan. The baby had been placed at Mountain View Children's Home. The baby's father was listed as unknown. Sarah had a child. I had a grandchild. The investigator gave me the address of Mountain View. I drove there that same day. I sat in my truck across the street and watched children playing in the yard. I did not know which one was Julia. I did not know if she was even there. The investigator said Sarah had left the baby at 6 months old and never returned. I wanted to go inside. I wanted to ask about my granddaughter, to see her, to know she was all right, but I could not make myself walk through that door. What would I say? I am the grandfather you never knew existed. Your mother is my daughter who I have not seen in 12 years. I want to take you home. I was 66 years old. I lived alone. I worked 12-hour days. I did not know the first thing about raising a child, especially a little girl. I had failed with Sarah. I would fail with Julia too. So I made a decision. I decided to leave Julia where she was. The home would take care of her. They would find her a family, give her parents who knew what they were doing, give her a chance at a real life. What could I offer except an old man's regrets? I drove away and I told myself it was the right decision. I told myself Julia was better off without me. But I could not forget about her. Every year on her birthday, I sent an anonymous donation to Mountain View, $500 every September. It was not much, but it was what I could afford. I told myself I was helping, that I was being responsible, that this was enough. It was not enough. It was cowardice dressed up as practicality. In 2003, I received a letter. It was from a hospice in Charleston. The letter informed me that Sarah Morgan Kane had passed away. Lung cancer. She was 34 years old. The letter said Sarah had requested that I be notified. She had not wanted to see me before she died, but she wanted me to know that she had forgiven me, that she understood I had been trying to protect her, even if I went about it the wrong way, that she hoped I had found some peace. I did not go to her funeral. I was too ashamed. I had spent 17 years telling myself I would find Sarah someday, would apologize, would make things right, and now she was dead and I had run out of time. Julia, if you are reading this, then you found the workshop. You found the chisel I made in 1962, the first year I went into business for myself. You found your way home. I need you to know something. I failed your mother. I failed you. I made choices out of pride and fear and stubbornness, and those choices cost me everything that mattered. I cannot undo what I did, but I can try to explain. In this box, you will find a map of Millbrook. I have marked 47 houses on that map. Every house I built in my 48 years as a carpenter. In each of those houses, I hid something, a letter, a memory, a piece of the truth about who I was and what I valued. I could not tell these stories while I was alive because I was too ashamed. But death has a way of loosening your tongue. These houses are my confession. They are my attempt to show you that even though I failed the people I loved most, I tried to build something good in this world. Find the houses, find the letters, and then decide if the Morgan name is worth carrying forward. I am sorry I never got to meet you, Julia. I am sorry I was too afraid to be the grandfather you deserved. But know this, I loved your mother, and I loved you, even though I never had the courage to show it. The workshop is yours. The tools are yours. The legacy, such as it is yours. What you do with it is up to you. David Morgan, March 15th, 2010. I set the letter down, my vision blurred with tears. Marcus handed me a handkerchief without a word. I wiped my eyes and then I picked up the map. It was a hand-drawn map of Millbrook, carefully rendered in pencil and ink. 47 houses were marked with red X marks, each one numbered. Beside each number was a brief note. Coleman House, under the front porch. Webb House, inside the chimney. Chen House, beneath the floorboards in the master bedroom. He hid letters in all of them? I asked. Marcus nodded. Every house David built has a secret compartment built into the structure. Only someone who knows carpentry, who understands how houses are framed, would be able to find them. It was David's way of making sure that whoever came looking was someone who understood his craft, who appreciated what he built. I looked at the map, at the 47 red marks scattered across the town, 47 confessions, 47 pieces of my grandfather's soul hidden in the walls and floors and foundations of the houses he had spent his life building. I need to find them, I said. I need to read what he wrote. Marcus looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. Tomorrow, he said, it is getting dark and you have had a long day. Come back tomorrow and we will start hunting. Where am I supposed to stay? I asked, suddenly realizing I had nowhere to go. I had $16 in my pocket and no plan beyond finding this workshop. Marcus smiled for the first time since I had met him. David's house is about a mile from here. It has been sitting empty since he died. The power is still on. Water still works. It is not much, but it is a roof. You are a Morgan. It is yours now. He drove me to the house as the last light faded from the sky. It was a small cabin, one story, set back from the road with woods on three sides. The kind of place a man goes when he wants to be alone with his thoughts. Marcus unlocked the door and flipped on a light. The interior was sparse. A living room with a worn couch and a wood stove. A kitchen with old appliances and a table for one. A bedroom with a single bed, neatly made. A bathroom with a cracked mirror and a dripping faucet. Every surface was covered in a thin layer of dust. The air smelled stale, like a place that had been closed up for too long. But it was clean. It was orderly. It was the home of a man who had lived carefully, who had not needed much, who had been waiting for something that never came. I will be back tomorrow morning, Marcus said. We will start with the Coleman house. Pastor Coleman's daughter knows about the letter. David told a few of the homeowners before he died, the ones he trusted. They had been waiting for someone to come claim them. He left me there, in my grandfather's house, surrounded by the ghost of a man I would never meet. I walked through the rooms, touching things. A coffee mug in the sink, a flannel shirt hanging on the back of a chair, a photograph on the mantle of a young woman with dark hair and a bright smile. My mother, I thought. Sarah, before everything fell apart. I sat on the couch and pulled out the chisel, turning it over in my hands. The tools David had used for 48 years, the first thing he had made when he started his business, the thing he had kept all those years and my mother had taken when she left, and I had carried back to this place without knowing where I was going. I thought about David sitting in the same room alone, wondering where his daughter was. I thought about Sarah, wherever she had gone, carrying this chisel and a baby she could not keep. I thought about myself, 23 years in an orphanage, not knowing I had family just 3 hours away. So much time wasted, so many chances missed, so much love that never found its way home. I fell asleep on that couch, still holding the chisel, and I dreamed of houses being built and torn down and built again, an endless cycle of creation and destruction, each board and nail a choice that mattered more than anyone realized until it was too late to change. Marcus arrived at 7 the next morning with coffee in a thermos and a bag of donuts from the bakery on Main Street. I had been awake since 5, unable to sleep, pacing the small rooms of David's house like a ghost trying to remember how to haunt properly. The sunrise had come slow and cold, painting the mountains in shades of gray and gold, and I had watched it through the kitchen window while holding a coffee mug that still had the faint imprint of my grandfather's lips on the rim. "We are starting with number 1, Marcus said, unfolding the map on the hood of his truck. "The Coleman house." Pastor Coleman knew David better than almost anyone. "If any of these letters will help you understand your grandfather, it will be that one." The Coleman house sat on a quiet street 2 blocks from the church. It was the house I had seen yesterday, white with green shutters and that wheelchair ramp David had built. Marcus knocked on the door and a woman in her 60s answered. She had kind eyes and the tired look of someone who had been caring for an aging parent for too long. "You must be Julia," she said. "Dad told me about you before he passed. Well, not about you specifically, but he said someday someone from the Morgan family would come asking about the letter. Come in." Her name was Rebecca Coleman, named after my grandmother. She led us through a neat living room where an elderly woman sat in a wheelchair, staring at a television that was not turned on. "That is my mother," Rebecca said quietly. "She does not know us anymore, but she is peaceful. That is all we can ask for." Rebecca took us to the front porch, pointed to a specific board near the steps. "Dad said David built a small compartment under there. He said you would know how to find it." I knelt down, running my hands over the boards. They were old pine, weathered by decades of rain and snow and sun, but the craftsmanship was still evident. No nails driven crooked, no gaps between the boards. Everything tight and square and built to last. I found it by feel more than sight. One board was slightly different from the others. Not loose, but movable in a way the others were not. I pressed on one end and the other end lifted, revealing a small waterproof box underneath. Inside the box was a letter sealed in plastic to protect it from moisture. I opened the bag and pulled out 2 pieces of paper, folded together. The handwriting was David's. The letter was dated June 2009, less than a year before he died. "To whoever finds this, this is the first house I ever built. I was 31 years old, fresh out of the Army, trying to start a business with nothing but a truck full of tools and more ambition than sense. Pastor Frank Coleman took a chance on me when no one else would. He paid me half up front so I could buy materials, and he did not ask for references because he said he could tell a man's character by looking him in the eye. I built this house in the summer of 1963. My wife Rebecca was 6 months pregnant with Sarah. Every morning I would come here and work, and every evening I would go home and put my hands on Rebecca's belly and feel our daughter kick. I was building a house for the pastor, but in my mind, I was building a future for my family. Every board I cut, every nail I drove, was a promise that I would provide, that I would be the kind of father and husband who could be counted on. Rebecca died giving birth to Sarah. Complications the doctors could not fix. One moment I was a husband and a father, and the next moment I was just a father, trying to figure out how to raise a daughter alone. Pastor Coleman was the first person I called when Rebecca died. He came to the hospital and sat with me for 6 hours while I held my newborn daughter and tried to understand how the world could give me something so precious and take away something so vital in the same breath. He did not offer platitudes. He did not tell me it was God's plan. He just sat with me in my grief and let me feel what I needed to feel. For the next 16 years, Pastor Coleman was my anchor. When I did not know how to braid Sarah's hair, his wife taught me. When I did not know how to talk to Sarah about becoming a woman, he gave me books and advice. When Sarah was struggling in school, he tutored her for free every Tuesday evening. This house represents the beginning of my life as a builder, but it also represents the beginning of my life as a father. I learned in this house that good work is about more than straight lines and tight joints. It is about building something that will shelter people, that will be a foundation for the lives that happen inside its walls. I failed my daughter. I let pride and fear turn me into the kind of father who drives his child away. But I never failed my work. Every house I built as if it might save someone's life. Because in a way, shelter does save lives. A roof over your head, walls to keep out the cold, a floor solid enough to stand on. These things matter. They are the difference between surviving and drowning. If you are reading this, you are probably someone who understands that. Someone who knows that what you build with your hands is a reflection of what you carry in your heart. I hope you build better than I did. I hope you have the courage I lacked. David Morgan. I sat back on my heels, the letter trembling in my hands. Rebecca Coleman stood on the porch above me, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. He loved you, you know, she said quietly. David. He never said it out loud, but everyone could see it, the way he worked himself to exhaustion. The way he would stand at the back of the church on Sundays, watching the doors like he expected Sarah to walk through them. The way his face looked when someone mentioned having a daughter. He was a man carrying a wound that never healed. We visited 9 more houses that first day. Each one had a letter. Each letter was a window into David Morgan's soul. At the Webb house, Marcus's own home, the letter was hidden inside the chimney, tucked into a gap in the brickwork. David had written about the importance of second chances, about how Marcus had been laid off from the coal mine through no fault of his own, how the banks had turned him away, how David had decided that a man who showed up on time and worked hard deserved a home regardless of what some loan officer thought. At the Chen house, the letter was beneath a floorboard in the master bedroom. David had written about prejudice, about how Henry and Li Chen had been turned away by every contractor in town simply because of the color of their skin, how David had learned from the army that good men came in all colors and spoke all languages, how building a house for the Chens had cost him 3 other jobs, but was worth it because some things mattered more than money. At the Miller house, I found the letter that broke me. Mrs. Miller was 80 now, a widow who had raised 3 kids alone after her husband died in a mining accident. The house was small but well kept, every board and shingle still solid after 27 years. She invited us in for coffee, and I could see she had been crying. I knew David was gone, she said, but I kept hoping maybe Sarah would come back someday. I used to babysit her when she was little, before everything happened. She was such a sweet girl, so much like her mother. The letter was hidden in the crawl space beneath the house. Marcus had to wiggle through a narrow access panel to reach it, and when he handed it to me, the envelope was thick, multiple pages. "This one is different," Marcus said. "This is where David tells the hardest truth." I opened the envelope. 4 pages covered in David's handwriting. The letters less neat than the others, like they had been written in a hurry or with a shaking hand. The date was September 2003. I received a letter today. It came from Mercy Hospice in Charleston. The letter informed me that Sarah Morgan Kane passed away on September 8, 2003, after a 6-month battle with lung cancer. She was 34 years old. The letter said Sarah had requested I be notified, not because she wanted to see me before she died. She specifically did not want that. But she wanted me to know that she forgave me, that she understood I had been trying to protect her, even if I had gone about it in the worst possible way, that she hoped I had found some measure of peace in my life. I did not go to her funeral. I received the notification 3 days after she died, and the funeral was the next day. I could have made the drive. I could have stood in the back of whatever chapel they used, watched them lower my daughter into the ground, said goodbye, but I could not make myself go. I was too ashamed, too afraid, too broken by the knowledge that I had spent 17 years telling myself I would find Sarah someday, would apologize, would make things right, and now she was dead and I had run out of time. But that is not the hardest part. The hardest part is what the hospice letter told me about Julia, Sarah's daughter, my granddaughter. The letter mentioned her in passing, said Sarah's primary concern was making sure Julia was taken care of, that Sarah had made arrangements through Mountain View Children's Home, that Julia would be fine. I already knew about Julia. I have known since 1998 when a private investigator finally tracked down a birth certificate. Julia Morgan, born September 18th, 1991 at Charleston General Hospital. Mother, Sarah Morgan. Father, unknown. The investigator found out that Sarah had left Julia at Mountain View when the baby was 6 months old. Said she would come back for her when she got on her feet, but she never did. I drove to Charleston the day I found out. I sat in my truck across the street from Mountain View for 3 hours, watching children play in the yard. Julia would have been 7 years old. I did not know which child she was. I did not know if she was even outside that day. But I sat there and I watched, and I tried to imagine walking through that door and asking to see my granddaughter. What would I say? I am your grandfather. Your mother is my daughter who I have not seen in 12 years. I have no idea where she is or if she is even alive, but I want to take you home. I was 66 years old. I lived alone in a cabin in the woods. I worked 12-hour days, 6 days a week. I had failed at raising Sarah. What made me think I would do any better with Julia? So I left. I drove back to Millbrook and I told myself I had made the responsible choice. Julia was in a home. They would take care of her. They would find her a family. Good people who knew how to raise children. People who were not broken the way I was broken. But I could not forget about her. Every year on her birthday, I sent money, $500 in an envelope with no return address. It was not much, but it was what I could afford. I told myself I was helping, that I was being responsible, that this was enough. It was not enough. It was cowardice dressed up as charity. When I got the letter about Sarah's death, I called Mountain View. I did not identify myself. I just asked if they had a resident named Julia Morgan. The woman who answered said yes, Julia was still there. She was 12 years old. She had not been adopted. 12 years in that place. 12 years of watching other kids get families while she stayed behind. 12 years I could have prevented if I had been brave enough to walk through that door back in 1998. I thought about driving to Charleston again. Thought about finally doing what I should have done 5 years earlier. But I am 71 years old now. My heart is not good. The doctor says I need to slow down, maybe stop working altogether. How can I take in a 12-year-old girl when I do not know if I will live another 5 years? So I am making a different choice. I am leaving everything to Julia in my will. The workshop, the house, the land, what little money I have saved. And I am writing these letters, hiding them in every house I have built, telling the truth about who I was and what I valued and where I failed. Maybe Julia will never find them. Maybe she will grow up and move on and never know I existed. But if she does come looking, if she finds this workshop and these letters, at least she will know that I thought about her, that I wanted to do right by her, that I loved her even though I never had the courage to show it. I am a builder. I know how to measure twice and cut once, how to square a corner, how to make something that will last. But I never learned how to build a family. I never learned that love requires more than providing and protecting. It requires presence. It requires being willing to walk through the door even when you are afraid of what is on the other side. I failed Sarah. I failed Julia. I failed at the only thing that truly mattered. But maybe if Julia reads this, she will understand that failure does not mean I did not care. It just means I was not strong enough to love the way I should have. To whoever is reading this, I hope you are braver than I was. I hope you walk through the doors I could not walk through. I hope you build the family I could not build. And if you are Julia, if you are my granddaughter reading this, I need you to know something. You deserve better than me. You deserve better than your mother. You deserve better than all of this. But you are a Morgan, and Morgans are builders. We take broken things and we make them whole. We take empty spaces and we fill them with something solid. Build better than I did. Love better than I did. Have the courage I lacked. I am so sorry. David Morgan, September 2003. The pages shook in my hands. Marcus stood beside me, his face wet with tears he was not bothering to hide. Mrs. Miller had come out onto the porch and was watching us with an expression of profound sadness. He knew, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He knew about me for 5 years, and he never came. He just sent money and told himself it was enough. Marcus put his hand on my shoulder. He was afraid, Julia. He was a 71-year-old man with a bad heart and a history of failing the people he loved. He thought you were better off without him. I stood up, the letter clutched in my fist. Was I better off, I asked, and I could hear the anger in my voice now, burning through the sadness. Was I better off spending 12 more years in that place? Watching other kids get adopted while I stayed behind? Going to bed every night wondering what was wrong with me? Why nobody wanted me? Marcus did not answer. There was no answer. David had made a choice, and that choice had shaped my entire childhood. He had chosen fear over courage, and I had paid the price. I need to see the rest, I said. All of them. Every letter. I need to know everything. We spent the next 3 days hunting through houses. Marcus drove me from one to the next, and at each house we found another piece of David's story. Letters about the families he had built for. Letters about the mistakes he had made. Letters about Sarah. At house number 17, I found a letter about the day Sarah was born and Rebecca died. David described holding his newborn daughter while his wife's body grew cold in the bed beside him. He described making a promise to Rebecca's memory that he would be both mother and father to Sarah, that he would give her everything she needed, that he would protect her from every harm. He wrote, I thought protection meant making her strong and independent. I thought it meant teaching her that the world was hard and she needed to be harder. I did not understand until it was too late that protection also means softness. It means being willing to bend instead of demanding she break. At house number 23, I found a letter about the fight that drove Sarah away. David described the words he had said, the ultimatum he had given, the look on Sarah's face when she realized he was serious. He wrote about standing at her bedroom door that night, his hand raised to knock, to apologize, to take it all back. But pride had kept him frozen. Pride in the belief that a father who backs down is a father who has failed. He wrote, I chose being right over being her father. I wonder now if I was ever right about anything that mattered. At house number 31, built in 1995, I found something that made me sit down hard on the front steps and put my head in my hands. The letter described the monthly donations David had been making to Mountain View. $500 every September, sent anonymously, designated for Julia Morgan's education fund. The letter included copies of the money order receipts, each one dated, each one in an amount that represented a significant portion of David's monthly income. He had been sending this money for 12 years, $6,000 total. Money he could barely afford, money that should have gone to his own retirement or medical care or simple comfort in his old age. But he had sent it faithfully every year on my birthday. The letter explained why he had kept it anonymous. He wrote, if Julia knows the money comes from me, she might feel obligated to find me, to thank me, to let me into her life, and I do not deserve that. I gave up the right to be her grandfather when I drove away from Mountain View that day. This money is not a gift. It is a debt I am trying to repay, 1 month at a time, knowing I will never come close to paying what I owe. Pastor Frank had never told me about this money. The donations had gone into a general fund at Mountain View, used for field trips and supplies and the 100 small expenses that came with caring for unwanted children. I had benefited from it without knowing. We all had. Marcus, I said, my voice rough, he loved me. In his broken way, he loved me. Yes, Marcus said simply, he did. At house number 40, built in 2005, just 5 years before David died, I found a letter that was different from all the others, shorter, harder, written in a hand that shook with age or emotion or both. The letter said, I am 73 years old and I have wasted my life. I built 40 houses and I could not build one family. I had a daughter and a granddaughter, and I lost them both because I was too proud and too afraid and too convinced that I knew better than my own heart. If you are reading this, you are probably someone who understands regret. Someone who knows what it feels like to make a choice and spend the rest of your life wishing you could take it back. I cannot give you advice because I do not know how to fix what I broke. But I can tell you this, do not wait. Whatever door you are afraid to walk through it now. Whatever words you are afraid to say them today. Whatever love you are holding back, give it freely. Time is not infinite. Second chances are not guaranteed. And the things we leave unsaid are the things that haunt us in the end. We finished the hunt on the 4th day. 47 houses, 47 letters, 47 pieces of David Morgan's soul laid bare for me to examine and judge, and perhaps to understand. The last house was number 47, and when Marcus pulled up to the address on the map, I did not understand what I was seeing. It was not a house. It was a vacant lot next to the workshop, maybe half an acre of cleared land with a foundation poured and the beginning of a frame rising from it. The skeleton of a house, abandoned mid-construction. Marcus turned off the engine and we both sat there staring. "What is this?" I asked. "David started building this in 2009, Marcus said quietly. "About a year before he died. He worked on it in the evenings after I went home. He would not let me help. He said this was something he had to do alone." "What was it supposed to be?" "A house," Marcus said, "for you, for Julia. This was going to be your house." I got out of the truck on shaky legs. I walked onto the lot, stepping carefully over lumber and tools left lying where they had been dropped 5 years ago. The foundation was solid, poured concrete with rebar reinforcing it. The frame was maybe 20% complete, just the basic structure of exterior walls and a few interior supports. In the center of where the living room would have been, there was a wooden box, larger than the others, maybe 2 feet by 3 feet, made from the same walnut as the box in the workshop. I knelt beside it and lifted the lid. Inside was a complete set of blueprints, hand-drawn, meticulously detailed, showing every aspect of the house David had been planning to build. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with windows facing east to catch the morning sun. A workshop in the back where someone could learn the trade. Beneath the blueprints was a letter, the last letter. "Julia, this house is for you. I started building it when I turned 77 and the doctor told me my heart was failing. I knew I did not have much time left. I knew I would never finish it, but I wanted to leave you something real, something you could touch and know that your grandfather was thinking about you, planning for you, building for you, even though we had never met. I will not see you grow up. I will not teach you to use a saw or square a corner or read a level. I will not walk you down an aisle or meet your children or any of the 1,000 things a grandfather is supposed to do. But I can leave you this, a foundation, a frame, the beginning of something you can finish. The blueprints are complete. The materials are paid for, stored in the workshop. All you have to do is pick up the tools and build. Or do not. Sell the land, take the money, walk away. You owe me nothing. I gave you nothing when it mattered. But if you do build it, if you choose to finish what I started, then you will be doing what Morgans have always done, taking something broken and making it whole, taking an empty space and filling it with something that matters. I loved you, Julia. I loved you from the moment I knew you existed. I loved you every September when I sent that money. I loved you every time I drove past Mountain View and did not have the courage to stop. I loved you every night when I lay in bed and wondered what kind of person you were becoming and whether you would hate me if you knew the truth. I was not a good grandfather. I was not even a mediocre one. I was an absence, a hole in your life where someone should have been. But I was a builder. And this house, unfinished as it is my last attempt to give you something of value. Build it or burn it. Keep it or sell it. The choice is yours. I am sorry I was not braver. I am sorry I let fear win. I am sorry for all of it. Your grandfather, David Morgan. March 2010. I set the letter down and looked at the frame rising from the foundation. The skeleton of a house that was supposed to be mine. The last thing David had worked on before his heart gave out. Marcus stood beside me, his hands in his pockets. "He died right over there," Marcus said, pointing to the workshop. "But he spent his last evening here working on this frame. I think he knew his time was short. I think he was trying to get as much done as possible before it was too late." I walked the perimeter of the foundation, running my hand along the concrete. It was smooth, well poured, properly cured. The frame was square, the joints tight. Even in his 70s, even working alone in the fading light, David had not cut corners. He had built it right. "What am I supposed to do with this?" I asked. Marcus looked at me for a long moment. "That depends," he said. "Do you want to be a Morgan? Do you want to finish what your grandfather started? Or do you want to walk away from all of this and build a different life somewhere else?" I did not answer. I could not answer. I stood there in the middle of an unfinished house with letters from a dead grandfather and a chisel that had traveled across decades to find its way back home. And I did not know what I was supposed to feel. Anger? I felt that. David had known about me for 12 years and never came. He had let me grow up alone when he could have given me a family. Sadness? I felt that too. David had loved me in his broken way, had tried to build something for me even as he was dying, had left me everything he had to give. But underneath all of that, beneath the anger and sadness and confusion, I felt something else, something I had never felt before. I felt like I belonged somewhere, like I came from something, Like the fact that I was good with my hands and understood how things fit together was not just random chance, but inheritance. Blood and bone and skill passed down through generations. I need time to think, I said finally. Take all the time you need, Marcus said. This has all been here for 5 years. It will be here tomorrow and the day after that. When you are ready to decide, I will be here to help. We drove back to David's cabin in silence. Marcus dropped me off and headed home, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my grandfather's ghost. I spent that night reading through all the letters again, laying them out on the floor of the living room in chronological order. 47 letters spanning 48 years of work, a paper trail of a man's life, told through the houses he built and the families he sheltered and the mistakes he could not fix. And I thought about Sarah, my mother, the girl who had run away at 16 and never came back, the woman who had given birth to me and left me at an orphanage and died at 34 without ever telling me she was sorry. I did not have her letters yet. I did not know her side of the story, but I needed to. I needed to understand what had driven her to leave, what had kept her away, what had broken in her that could not be repaired. Tomorrow I would call Pastor Frank. Tomorrow I would ask about my mother's last days, about what she had said, about whether she had left anything for me beyond a chisel and a trail of breadcrumbs. But tonight, I sat in my grandfather's house, surrounded by his words, and I let myself grieve for everything we had lost and everything we could never get back. I called Pastor Frank Coleman the next morning at 6 before I could lose my nerve. The phone rang 4 times and I almost hung up. But then his voice came through, rough with sleep and age. "Julia," he said. He had caller ID, had known it was me before he answered. "I have been expecting your call." "You knew," I said. "About David, about the money he sent, about all of it." There was a long pause. "Yes," he said finally, "I knew." "Why did you never tell me?" "Because David asked me not to. He made me promise. He said if you knew the money came from him, you might try to find him, and he did not want that. He thought he would only hurt you worse." I pressed my forehead against the cold window of David's kitchen, watching the sun rise over the mountains. "He hurt me anyway," I said, "by not being there." "I know," Pastor Frank said, and his voice was heavy with sorrow. "I told him that, many times over the years. I told him he was making a mistake, that you deserved to know you had family. But David was convinced he would fail you the way he failed Sarah. And the more time passed, the harder it became for him to change course. I need to know about my mother," I said. "I need to know what happened to her, how she lived, how she died." Pastor Frank was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Can you come to Charleston? There are things I need to show you, things Sarah left behind." I borrowed Marcus's truck and made the 3-hour drive north. The highway cut through mountains still brown with winter, past towns that looked like they were barely holding on, past exit signs for places I had never been and would probably never visit. I drove with the windows cracked despite the cold because I needed air, needed to feel like I was moving towards something instead of just running away. Mountain View Children's Home looked smaller than I remembered. I had left this place only a week ago, but it felt like years. The gray brick building, the chain link fence around the playground, the sign out front that needed a fresh coat of paint. This had been my whole world for 23 years, and now it felt like someone else's memory. Pastor Frank was waiting for me in his office, the same cramped room where I had sat through countless meetings about my future, my behavior, my prospects. He looked older than he had a week ago, or maybe I was just seeing him with different eyes now. He stood when I entered and pulled me into a hug that was less awkward than usual. Then he gestured for me to sit, and he pulled a large cardboard box from behind his desk. "Sarah brought this here in March of 2003, he said, 2 months before she died. She was very sick by then. I could see it in her face and the way she moved. She asked me to keep this box safe and to give it to you when you turn 23. She was very specific about the age. She said you needed to be old enough to understand." "What is in it?" I asked. "Her life," Pastor Frank said simply. "Everything she wanted you to know." He set the box on the desk between us. It was sealed with packing tape that had yellowed with age. Written on the side in black marker were the words, "For Julia Morgan, to be opened on her 23rd birthday or when she leaves Mountain View, whichever comes first." Pastor Frank handed me a box cutter. "This is your story," he said. "I will step outside and give you privacy." "No," I said. "Stay, please. I do not want to do this alone." He nodded and sat back down, I cut through the tape and opened the box. Inside were journals, dozens of them, spiral-bound notebooks with dates written on the covers in the same handwriting that had addressed the box, spanning from 1986 to 2003. 17 years of my mother's life, documented in her own words. Beneath the journals was a large manila envelope with my name on it. Inside the envelope were photographs, documents, and 2 letters. One letter was addressed to me. The other was addressed to David Morgan, unsealed, as if Sarah had intended to send it, but never found the courage. I pulled out the photographs first. They were snapshots of a life I had never known. Sarah as a teenager, smiling at the camera in front of Millbrook High School. Sarah with a young man who must have been Thomas Kane. Both of them laughing, his arm around her shoulders. Sarah pregnant, her hand on her belly, looking tired but hopeful. Sarah holding a baby, holding me. I stared at that photograph for a long time. My mother looked so young, barely more than a child herself. Dark hair falling around her face, eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but smiling down at the infant in her arms with an expression of pure love. Pastor Frank leaned forward. "That was taken the day you were born," he said quietly. "September 18th, 1991. Sarah asked one of the nurses to take it. She said she wanted to remember this moment forever." I set the photo down carefully, my hands shaking. Then I picked up the letter addressed to me. The envelope was thick, multiple pages inside. I opened it and began to read. "My dearest Julia, if you are reading this, then I am gone. I am so sorry. I am writing this letter in March of 2003. I am 33 years old and I am dying. The doctors say I have maybe 4 months left. Lung cancer, stage 4. I have never smoked a cigarette in my life, but that does not seem to matter. Sometimes the world is just cruel for no reason at all. I need to tell you the truth about why I left you at Mountain View. I need you to understand that it was not because I did not love you. It was because I loved you too much and I was too broken to do right by you. I was 16 when I got pregnant. Your father's name was Thomas Kane. He was 19, an art student, the most beautiful person I had ever met. We were going to get married, going to build a life together, going to be a family. But my father, your grandfather, David, forbade it. He said Thomas was irresponsible, that I was throwing my life away, that if I chose Thomas over my family, I could leave. So I left. I packed a bag and I walked out of the only home I had ever known, and I thought I was so brave, so sure of myself, so certain that love would be enough. It was not enough. Thomas and I moved to Pittsburgh. He was in art school and I got a job as a waitress. We were poor, Julia, so poor that some nights we had to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. But we were together and we were going to make it work. And then in August of 1991, when I was 8 months pregnant, Thomas died. It was a car accident. He was driving to the hospital because I had gone into early labor. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit him head on. The police said Thomas died instantly. He never even knew whether we had a boy or a girl. I gave birth to you 12 hours after they told me Thomas was dead. The nurses were so kind. They let me hold you for as long as I wanted. They took that photograph. They told me you were perfect, healthy, beautiful. And you were. You are. But I was 21 years old, alone, broke, and broken. I had no family. Thomas's family wanted nothing to do with me. They blamed me for his death, said if he had never met me, he would still be alive. Maybe they were right. I tried, Julia. I really tried. I stayed with you for 6 months. I worked double shifts at the diner and brought you with me, keeping you in a basket behind the counter. The owner let me because she felt sorry for me. But I was barely making enough to pay for the tiny room we were renting. And I was so tired all the time, and you deserved so much better than what I could give you. So I brought you to Mountain View. I told Pastor Frank I would come back for you as soon as I got on my feet. I meant it when I said it. I really believed I would build a better life and come back and be the mother you needed. But months turned into years, and I could never get on my feet. I worked minimum wage jobs, lived in cheap apartments, barely survived. I was depressed, Julia. I know that now. I should have gotten help, should have talked to someone, should have done 100 things differently. But I did not. I just kept telling myself that next month would be better. Next year I would be ready. Someday I would be the mother you deserved. And then it was too late. You were 5, then 7, then 10, And I had missed so much of your life that I did not know how to walk back into it. What would I say? Sorry I abandoned you, but I am ready to be your mom now. You would have hated me. You should have hated me. I watched you from a distance. I came to Charleston twice a year, and I would stand across the street from Mountain View and watch you play. I saw you grow from a baby to a little girl to a young woman. I saw you learn to ride a bike. I saw you sitting alone sometimes, reading under a tree while the other kids played. I saw you and I wanted so badly to run to you, to hold you, to tell you I was sorry. But I never did. I was too ashamed, too convinced that your life was better without me in it. I kept working. I kept saving money. Every paycheck I put away $20. It was not much, but over 17 years it added up. When I die, there will be about $9,000 in a savings account. It is yours. It is not enough to make up for what I took from you, but it is all I have. There is something else you need to know. Something about your grandfather. I never saw my father again after I left Millbrook. I was too angry, too hurt, too stubborn to reach out. But a few years ago, I started thinking about him. I started wondering if maybe he had been right, if maybe I had thrown away my life out of teenage rebellion and pride. I thought about calling him, about apologizing, about asking if we could start over. But I could not make myself do it. The same fear that kept me away from you kept me away from him. I was afraid he would reject me, afraid he would say, "I told you so," afraid he would look at what I had become and be disappointed. So I never called. And now I am dying and it is too late. But I wrote him a letter. It is in this box. I want you to read it. And if you ever find him, if you ever go back to Millbrook, I want you to give it to him. Tell him I am sorry. Tell him I understand now what it means to love someone and fail them. Tell him I forgive him for everything, and I hope he can forgive me too. Julia, you are not a mistake. You are not unwanted. You are the best thing I ever did in this world, even if I was too broken to be the mother you needed. I hope you are strong. I hope you are brave. I hope you have found people who love you the way you deserve to be loved. I am leaving you my journals. They tell the whole story, the parts I am too ashamed to write in this letter. Read them if you want to understand me, or do not read them if you would rather not know. The choice is yours. I am also leaving you the chisel. It belonged to your grandfather, David. It was the first tool he ever made. I took it with me when I left Millbrook because I wanted something of his, something to remind me where I came from. I want you to have it now. Maybe someday you will take it back to Millbrook. Maybe you will find your grandfather and give him the letter and the chisel and tell him his daughter loved him, even though she could never find the words to say it. Or maybe you will keep the chisel and start building your own life, your own future, your own family. That would be good too. That would be exactly what you should do. Forgive me, Julia, or do not. Either way, know that I loved you with everything I had. I just did not have enough. Your mother, Sarah Morgan Kane. I set the letter down and covered my face with my hands. Pastor Frank sat quietly across from me, giving me space to feel what I needed to feel. After a long moment, I picked up the second letter, the one addressed to David Morgan, the one Sarah had written but never sent. I opened it and read, "Dad, I do not know if you are still alive. I do not know if you would want to hear from me after 17 years of silence. But I am dying and I need to say this. I am sorry. I am sorry I left the way I did. I am sorry I never called, never wrote, never gave you a chance to know your granddaughter. I am sorry I let pride and hurt and stubbornness keep us apart for all these years. Thomas was a good man, Dad. I know you did not think so. I know you thought he was irresponsible and impractical and all the things you hated. But he was kind. He made me laugh. He saw me as more than just David Morgan's daughter. He made me feel like I could be anything I wanted to be. He died before Julia was born. Car accident. He was 24 years old and he died driving to the hospital to see his daughter come into the world. I know what you are thinking. You are thinking that if I had listened to you, if I had stayed in Millbrook, Thomas would still be alive. Maybe you are right. I have thought that same thing 1,000 times. But I cannot change the past. I can only tell you what happened after. I had a baby girl. I named her Julia after Thomas's mother. She has your eyes, Dad. That same gray blue that cuts right through people. She has your hands too, the long fingers good for working with tools. I can see you in her, even though you have never met. I tried to raise her. I really tried, but I was 21 and broke and so depressed I could barely get out of bed most days. So I left her at a children's home in Charleston. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I would come back for her. But I never did. I was too ashamed, too broken, too convinced she was better off without me. I am exactly like you, Dad. I pushed away the person I loved most because I thought I was protecting them. I thought I knew what was best. I thought love meant making hard choices even when those choices broke my heart. We were both wrong. I know that now. Love is not about protection or practicality or being right. Love is about showing up. It is about being willing to fail and trying anyway. It is about putting your pride aside and saying, I am sorry, and I need you, and I love you, even when those words feel impossible to say. I never learned that lesson in time. But maybe you did. Maybe you are a better person than I was. Maybe you found Julia and gave her the family I could not give her. Or maybe you are like me. Maybe you are sitting somewhere alone, carrying regrets you cannot fix, wishing you had been braver. If you are, I want you to know something. I forgive you, Dad, for the ultimatum, for the hard words, for all of it. You were trying to protect me the only way you knew how. You thought you were saving me from making a mistake. You did not understand that the only mistake was making me choose. I hope you can forgive me too, for leaving, for staying gone, for keeping Julia from you, for all the years we lost. I wish I could see you one more time. I wish I could introduce you to your granddaughter and watch you teach her to use a saw the way you taught me. I wish I could tell you face to face that I understand now, that I know you loved me even when you were pushing me away. But I am out of time and chances. So I am writing this letter and I am giving it to Julia, and I am hoping that someday, somehow, the two of you will find each other, that you will be braver than I was, that you will walk through the doors I could not walk through. Build something good, Dad. Build the family we could not build. Love Julia the way you wanted to love me, but did not know how. And tell her I am sorry. Tell her I loved her. Tell her she was not a mistake. I love you, Dad. I always did. Your daughter, Sarah. I folded the letter carefully and set it back in the envelope. Then I picked up the first journal, dated January 1986, and I began to read. The journals told the story the letters had only outlined. They were raw, unfiltered, written by a girl who became a woman too fast and never quite figured out how to carry the weight. I read about Sarah's pregnancy, about the fear and excitement tangled together. I read about the fight with David, about the words they had both said that could never be taken back. I read about the months in Pittsburgh with Thomas, the poverty and the hope, the plans they made for a future that would never come. I read about the night Thomas died. Sarah's entry from August 12, 1991, was written in handwriting that shook and smeared with tears. Thomas is dead. They told me 2 hours ago. I am in the hospital and I am in labor, and the father of my baby is dead, and I do not know how to be alive in a world where he does not exist. The nurses keep asking if there is someone they can call. Family, friends, anyone. But there is no one. Dad would say, I told you so. Thomas's parents blame me. I am completely alone. I am going to have this baby in a few hours, and I do not know what I am going to do. How do you raise a child when you are barely more than a child yourself? How do you explain to your daughter that her father died before he could meet her? I do not know how to do this. I do not know how to be strong enough for both of us. The entries after my birth were sporadic, scattered, the words of someone barely holding on. Sarah wrote about sleepless nights, about working double shifts while I slept in a basket, about the constant fear that she was doing everything wrong. And then, March 19th, 1992, the entry that broke my heart. I took Julia to Mountain View today. I told them I needed help, that I was struggling, that I just needed a few weeks to get on my feet. But I am lying. I am not coming back in a few weeks. I do not know if I am ever coming back. I held her for 3 hours before I could make myself leave. I memorized every detail of her face, the way her hair curls at her temples, the little birthmark on her left shoulder, the sound she makes when she is falling asleep. Pastor Frank promised me they would take care of her. He said they would find her a good family, people who have money and stability and all the things I cannot give her. I am doing the right thing. I know I am. Julia deserves better than a mother who cries more than she smiles, who can barely afford to feed herself, let alone a baby, who wakes up every morning wondering why she is still alive when Thomas is dead. But walking away from that building was the hardest thing I have ever done. I can still hear her crying. I can still feel her little hand holding my finger. I am 22 years old and I have lost everything that matters. my father, Thomas, and now Julia. I am a coward and a failure, and I do not deserve to be anyone's mother. The years that followed were documented in entries that grew increasingly sparse. Sarah worked a series of dead-end jobs. She moved from one cheap apartment to another. She battled depression that she never properly treated. And every September 18th, she wrote an entry about me. Julia is 2 today. I bought a cupcake and put a candle in it and sang happy birthday to myself in my empty apartment. I wonder if anyone sang to her. I wonder if she is walking yet, talking yet, asking about her mother yet. Julia is 5 today. She started kindergarten this year. I know because I called Mountain View and asked. They would not tell me anything specific, said it was policy, but they confirmed she is still there, still waiting for a family. I could be her family. I could walk in there right now and take her home. But what kind of home would it be? A studio apartment with water stains on the ceiling and neighbors who fight at 2 in the morning? I am barely keeping myself alive. How can I keep a child alive? Julia is 10 today, double digits. She is probably taller than me by now. I wonder what she looks like. Does she remember me at all? Does she hate me? She should hate me. I tried to visit today, but I could not make myself go inside. I stood across the street for an hour watching the building, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. But I am a coward. I have always been a coward. The entries from 2002 and 2003 were darker. Sarah had started coughing blood. She ignored it for months because she did not have health insurance and was afraid of what the doctors would say. By the time she finally went to the hospital, the cancer had spread. The last entry was dated March 20th, 2003, written in handwriting so shaky I could barely read it. I have 4 months to live, maybe less. The cancer is everywhere. They offered chemotherapy, but it would only buy me a few more weeks, and I would spend them sick and in pain. I am 33 years old, and I have wasted my entire life. I never reconciled with Dad. I never went back for Julia. I never did any of the brave things I promised myself I would do someday. Someday never came. I am writing letters. One for Julia, one for Dad. I am giving them to Pastor Frank with all my journals and the little bit of money I managed to save. It is not much, but it is all I have to give. I hope someday Julia reads this and understands that I loved her. That leaving her was not about her being unwanted. It was about me being broken. I hope Dad knows I forgive him, that I understand now what he was trying to do. I hope Julia and Dad find each other. I hope they build the family I could not build. I am so tired. I am ready to rest. I am ready to see Thomas again and tell him about our daughter and apologize for all the years he missed. To whoever reads this, do not make the mistakes I made. Do not let fear win. Do not waste the time you have with the people you love. Walk through the doors, say the words, build the family. I ran out of time, but maybe you will not. I closed the journal and set it on top of the others. Pastor Frank had been sitting silently through all of this, letting me read, letting me grieve. Now he leaned forward and put his hand on mine. She loved you, he said, quietly. In her broken way, she loved you very much. I know, I said, and that somehow makes it worse. If she had not loved me, if she had been cruel or indifferent, I could hate her. But she loved me and she still left. She loved me and she still let me grow up alone. Fear is a terrible thing, Pastor Frank said. It makes us abandon the people we love in the name of protecting them. Your mother was afraid she would fail you. Your grandfather was afraid he would fail you. And that fear became a self-fulfilling prophecy. I looked at him. You think I should forgive them? I think forgiveness is not about them, he said. It is about you. It is about deciding whether you want to carry this anger for the rest of your life or whether you want to set it down and build something new. I spent the rest of that day in Pastor Frank's office, reading through more of the journals, looking at photographs, piecing together a life I had never known. Sarah as a child, smiling with missing teeth. Sarah as a teenager, rebellious and bright. Sarah as a young woman, exhausted and heartbroken. Sarah dying alone, leaving letters she hoped would bridge the gap she had created. By the time I finished, it was dark outside. Pastor Frank offered to let me stay in one of the empty rooms at Mountain View, but I could not bear the thought of sleeping in that building again. Instead, I drove back to Millbrook, the truck loaded with boxes of journals and photographs and the accumulated wreckage of 2 generations of failure. I drove through the darkness with the windows down, letting the cold air keep me awake, keep me present. I thought about Sarah and David, about the choices they had made and the reasons behind those choices. I thought about how they had both loved me and both failed me and both spent their lives trying to make it right in ways that were never quite enough. And I thought about the house, the unfinished house that David had started building for me, the foundation and the frame and the blueprints for something that could be completed if someone was willing to do the work. By the time I pulled into the driveway of David's cabin, I knew what I had to do. I called Marcus. It was after midnight, but he answered on the second ring, alert, like he had been expecting my call. I want to build it, I said. The house. I want to finish what David started. There was a pause, and then Marcus said, all right, when do we start? Tomorrow, I said. We start tomorrow. I hung up and sat in the truck for a long time, looking at the cabin where my grandfather had lived alone for so many years, carrying regrets he could not fix, building houses for other people because he could not build the family he wanted. I thought about Sarah working minimum wage jobs and saving $20 at a time, trying to build something for me even as she was dying. I thought about myself, 23 years old with a chisel and a map and an unfinished house, and a choice about what kind of person I wanted to become. I could walk away. I could sell everything, take the money, build a life somewhere else, start fresh with no history, no ghosts, no weight. Or I could stay. I could pick up the tools my grandfather had left me. I could finish the house he had started. I could turn this inheritance of failure and regret into something solid, something real, something that might help other people the way I wish someone had helped me. I got out of the truck and walked to the vacant lot where the frame stood against the night sky, the skeleton of a house, waiting. I ran my hand along one of the studs, feeling the smooth wood, the tight joints, the evidence of careful work done by an old man who knew he was running out of time. David had written that Morgans were builders, that we took broken things and made them whole. I did not know if that was true. I did not know if I had inherited anything from my grandfather except his tools and his regrets. But I knew I had to try. I stood there in the darkness, surrounded by the ghosts of the people who had loved me and failed me, and I made a promise. I would finish this house. I would learn the trade. I would become the kind of person who built things that lasted, who showed up when it mattered, who had the courage my mother and grandfather had lacked. I would be a Morgan, not because I wanted to honor them, but because I wanted to prove that the cycle could be broken, that failure was not inevitable, that you could take the broken pieces of your inheritance and build something good. Tomorrow, I would pick up the tools. Tomorrow, I would start building. Tonight, I stood in the frame of an unfinished house and let myself grieve for everything we had lost and everything we were about to become. Marcus arrived at dawn with his truck bed full of lumber and a thermos of coffee that was already half empty. I had been awake for hours, standing in the frame of the unfinished house, watching the sun climb over the mountains and paint everything gold. The morning was cold enough that my breath came out in clouds, but I barely felt it. I was too focused on what was about to begin. "You ready?" Marcus asked, handing me a cup of coffee. "I do not know," I admitted. "I have never built a house before." "Nobody has," he said, "until they do. David taught me everything I know, and I will teach you. We will take it one board at a time, one nail at a time. That is how everything gets built." We started with the basics. Marcus showed me how to read the blueprints David had drawn, how to understand the language of measurements and angles and load-bearing walls. He taught me the names of tools I had only seen but never used. Circular saw, miter saw, framing nailer, level, square, chalk line. Each tool had its purpose, its proper use, its place in the larger work. The first wall we raised together took us 6 hours. Marcus was patient, explaining each step, correcting my mistakes before I made them, showing me how to check and double-check. Because a wall that is not square will cause problems down the line that cannot be easily fixed. "Measure twice, cut once," he said. David used to say that about everything, not just carpentry, life in general. Think about what you are doing before you do it. Once you cut, you cannot uncut. I thought about Sarah and David, about all the cuts they had made that could not be undone, the words spoken in anger, the doors walked through and never returned to, the years that passed while they waited for the right moment that never came. "I will not make their mistakes," I said. Marcus looked at me for a long moment, then he nodded. "I believe you," he said. The work was hard, harder than anything I had done at Mountain View, harder than the odd jobs I had worked to save money. My hands blistered and bled, my back ached, my arms trembled from holding heavy boards in place, while Marcus secured them. Every night I fell into bed so exhausted I could barely move, and every morning I woke up sore in muscles I did not know I had. But there was something else too, something I had never felt before. Pride. The good kind. The kind that comes from building something with your own hands. From seeing raw materials transform into structure. From knowing that what you create will outlast you. Word spread through Millbrook that Julia Morgan was building a house on her grandfather's land. People started stopping by, some just to watch, some to offer advice, some to help. Henry Chen came by on a Saturday morning with his son, both of them carrying tool belts. "David built our house 40 years ago," Henry said. "We would like to help build yours." Ellen Patterson brought lunch for everyone who was working. Sandwiches and homemade cookies and lemonade in a big thermos. She sat in a lawn chair and watched us work, and I could see tears in her eyes. "David would be so proud," she said. Rebecca Coleman drove out with her elderly mother in the wheelchair. Mrs. Coleman did not speak anymore, lost somewhere in the fog of Alzheimer's. But Rebecca wheeled her close to the construction and said, "Mom helped her father build their house back in the 60s. She would want to see this." Even people I did not know came by. The owner of the hardware store delivered materials at cost. A retired electrician offered to wire the house for free. A plumber said he would do the same for the plumbing. These were people who had known David, who had lived in houses he built, who remembered him as a man who gave more than he took. Marcus worked beside me every day. He was a good teacher, patient and thorough, never rushing, always willing to explain something a second or third time until I understood. He taught me not just how to use the tools, but how to think like a carpenter, how to see a piece of wood and understand its grain, its strength, its flaws, how to know by the sound of a hammer hitting a nail whether it had seated properly, how to step back and look at your work with a critical eye, because good enough is not good enough when you are building something that has to last. One evening in May, after everyone else had gone home, a young man showed up at the construction site. He was maybe 30, wearing work boots and jeans covered in sawdust. He watched us work for a few minutes before speaking. "You are Julia Morgan," he said. It was not a question. "I am," I confirmed, setting down my hammer. "My name is Daniel Brooks. I heard what you were doing here, building on your grandfather's land." He paused, looking at the frame rising behind me. "I grew up 3 houses down from here. David Morgan built my parents' house in 1998. Built it at Pedobic because my dad had just lost his job and we were about to be homeless." I did not know what to say. I waited. Daniel shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "I moved to Pittsburgh 10 years ago, got married, had kids, but I come back to visit my folks a few times a year." He looked at me directly now. "I heard you were building this yourself, learning the trade. I am a contractor in Pittsburgh. If you ever want to learn more than just framing, if you want to understand plumbing or electrical or finish work, I would be happy to teach you. No charge." It is what David would have wanted. Over the next 4 months, Daniel drove down from Pittsburgh twice a month to teach me. He showed me how to run electrical wire, how to install plumbing, how to hang drywall and tape seams and apply texture. He taught me things Marcus did not know, modern techniques and building codes and efficiency tricks. But more than that, he told me stories about David, about the man who had built his childhood home and saved his family from living in a car. "Your grandfather did not just build houses," Daniel said one afternoon as we installed a water heater. "He built futures. My dad got back on his feet because he had a roof over his head that he could afford. My mom did not have to choose between feeding us and paying rent. That stability, that foundation, it gave our family breathing room to survive." "Did you ever tell David what it meant?" I asked. Daniel shook his head. "I was 8 years old when he built our house. By the time I was old enough to understand what he had done, I had moved away. I always meant to come back and thank him. But I waited too long." His words stayed with me. Another person who had waited, who had assumed there would be more time, who had learned too late that tomorrow is not guaranteed. One evening after Daniel had gone home and Marcus and I sat on the foundation eating leftover sandwiches, Marcus looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. "You are good at this," he said. "Better than I expected. Better than David was at your age, if I am being honest." "I am just following instructions," I said. "No," Marcus corrected. "You are understanding the why behind the instructions. That is different. That is the mark of someone who will be a master someday, not just a carpenter." I looked at the house, at the walls now sheathed in plywood, at the roof trusses waiting to be covered. Master seems like a strong word for someone who started 6 months ago. David started the same way, Marcus said. He apprenticed with a builder after he left the army, spent 2 years doing grunt work, hauling lumber, mixing concrete, learning to take orders. But he paid attention. He asked questions. He understood that every small detail was part of a larger system. He took a drink of his coffee. You remind me of him, not just in how you look, but in how you work. You have that same focus, that same refusal to do things halfway. I thought about David working himself to exhaustion, trying to build his way to redemption. Is that a good thing, I asked? Or is it just another way to avoid dealing with harder problems? Marcus was quiet for a moment. That depends, he said. Are you building to hide from something, or are you building towards something? I did not answer. I could not answer, because I did not know yet. The house was finished in November. 6 months of hard work, early mornings and late nights, blistered hands and aching muscles. But it was done. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with windows facing east to catch the morning sun, a small workshop in the back, solid, square, built to last. We had a small celebration. Marcus brought beer. Ellen Patterson brought a cake. Henry Chen and his son came. Rebecca Coleman drove out with her mother. Daniel made the drive from Pittsburgh. A dozen other people from town showed up. People who had helped. People who had known David. People who wanted to see what had risen from the foundation he had poured. They walked through the rooms, admiring the craftsmanship, commenting on the tight joints and the level floors and the careful attention to detail. They said David would have been proud. They said it was good to have a Morgan building houses in Millbrook again. But that night, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone in the empty living room and felt nothing but hollow. The house was beautiful. It was well built. It was mine. But it was also too big for one person and too small for the weight of expectation that had gone into building it. I had finished what David started, but I had not answered the question of why. I thought about Sarah's journals, about her life of minimum wage jobs and cheap apartments and constant struggle. I thought about David's houses scattered across Millbrook, each one sheltering a family that had needed help. I thought about the $47,000 sitting in the bank account David had left me, money that could keep me comfortable for a few years, but would not last forever. And I thought about Mountain View, about the kids still living there, about the ones who would age out at 18 or 21 or 23 with nowhere to go and no one to help them. About myself, standing outside that building a week ago with $58 and a chisel and no plan except to follow a trail of breadcrumbs my dead mother had left. The next morning, I called Pastor Frank Coleman. I need to know something, I said. How many kids age out of Mountain View each year? Usually 6 to 8, he said. Why? What happens to them? Some do okay. They find jobs, find apartments, figure it out. But most struggle. No family support, no safety net, no one to co-sign a lease or help them buy a car or bail them out when things go wrong. We try to prepare them, but there is only so much we can do with limited resources. What if there was a place they could go, I asked, after they leave Mountain View? A place where they could live for a few months while they get on their feet. Learn some skills, get help finding jobs, have someone to fall back on. What are you proposing? Pastor Frank asked, and I could hear the hope creeping into his voice. I am proposing to turn my house into a transitional home, I said, for young adults aging out of foster care. I will provide housing and job training, carpentry mostly since that is what I know, but other things too, life skills, how to budget money, how to apply for jobs, how to believe you are worth something. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Pastor Frank said, Julia, do you understand what you are taking on? The liability, the responsibility, the emotional weight of working with traumatized young people? Yes, I said, because I was one of them. Another pause, then, how can I help? Over the next 2 months, I transformed the house. The 2 bedrooms became 4 smaller ones, each barely big enough for a bed and a dresser, but private, which mattered more than space. The living room became a common area with a large table for meals and homework. The workshop in the back was expanded, filled with tools and workbenches where people could learn to build. Marcus helped me navigate the legal requirements, licensing, insurance, background checks, inspections, mountains of paperwork that made building the actual house seem simple by comparison. Ellen Patterson helped me stock the kitchen and set up a meal program. Henry Chen donated lumber and supplies for the workshop. Rebecca Coleman connected me with social workers who worked with foster kids aging out of the system. Daniel drove down from Pittsburgh and helped me install commercial-grade appliances and fire suppression systems to meet code requirements. The bank account David had left me covered the initial costs. $47,000 went fast when you were setting up a nonprofit organization. But people in Millbrook rallied. Donations came in. A local restaurant agreed to provide leftover food at the end of each day. The retired electrician and plumber who had wired and plumbed the house offered to teach classes in their trades. In January of 2016, 10 months after I had walked out of Mountain View with nothing but a backpack and a chisel, I opened the doors of Morgan House. The first resident was a young man named Christopher. He was 19, had aged out of foster care in Charleston, and was living in his car while working part-time at a gas station. Pastor Frank had referred him to me. Christopher stood on the porch with a garbage bag full of his belongings, looking at me with the same distrust I had seen in my own eyes every time I looked in a mirror at Mountain View. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Because someone should have done it for me," I said, "and because I have a house and you need a place to stay. Those are the only reasons that matter." He moved into one of the small bedrooms. I gave him a week to settle in, to get used to the idea that this was real, that I was not going to suddenly change my mind and kick him out. Then I took him to the workshop and handed him a hammer. "We are going to build a bookshelf," I said, "for your room, and I am going to teach you how." "I do not know anything about carpentry," Christopher said. "Neither did I 10 months ago," I told him. "But Marcus taught me, and now I will teach you. That is how it works. We pass it on." Over the next 3 months, Christopher built that bookshelf. It was not perfect. The joints were not as tight as they should have been. One side was slightly taller than the other, but it was solid and functional, and he had made it with his own hands. The day he finished, he stood back and looked at it with an expression I recognized. Pride. The real kind. The kind that comes from creating something. "I never built anything before," he said quietly. "You have now," I told him. The second and third residents came in February. Kayla, 18, who had been in 7 different foster homes and trusted no one. Marcus, 21, no relation to Marcus Webb, who had spent 3 years sleeping in shelters and under bridges after aging out. Then Jessica, then David, named after a grandfather he had never known, and I wondered if maybe there was something to names, to the weight they carried. By March, Morgan House was full. 6 young people, all between 18 and 22, all trying to figure out how to build a life when they had never seen a good example of one. I taught them carpentry in the workshop. Marcus Webb came by 3 times a week to teach advanced techniques and tell stories about David Morgan, about the houses he had built and the people he had helped. I taught them other things too: how to cook basic meals, how to do laundry without ruining your clothes, how to write a resume, how to interview for a job, how to open a bank account. All the things I had to figure out on my own, I taught them so they would not have to struggle the way I had struggled. But mostly I taught them that they mattered, that they were worth the effort, that the fact they had been abandoned or neglected or failed by every adult in their lives did not mean there was something wrong with them. One evening in April, I sat with Kayla on the front porch. She had been with us for 2 months and was still barely speaking to anyone. She sat with her knees pulled up to her chest, staring out at the mountains. "Do you think people can change?" she asked suddenly. I thought about David, working himself to death trying to build his way to redemption. I thought about Sarah, saving $20 at a time for a daughter she was too afraid to face. I thought about myself, learning to use tools I had never touched, building a house I had never imagined. "I think people can choose to change," I said. "I think we can decide we do not want to repeat the patterns we inherited. It is hard. It does not erase the past. But yes, I think we can change." Kayla was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I want to learn to build things. Like you do. Like your grandfather did." The next morning, she joined us in the workshop. She was a natural, better than I had been when I started. Her hands were steady. Her measurements were precise. She listened carefully to instructions and asked good questions. Within a month, she had built a small table for her room. Within 2 months, she was helping teach the newer residents basic skills. Within 3 months, she told me she wanted to go to trade school, wanted to become a carpenter professionally. I helped her apply for scholarships. I wrote her letters of recommendation. I used some of the donation money to pay her application fees. And when she got accepted to a technical college in Charleston with a full scholarship, I drove her there myself and helped her move into the dorm. "You gave me this," she said as we carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs. No, I said. You built this yourself. I just showed you where the tools were. It was during this time that I met someone who would change my understanding of what I was building. Her name was Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to Henry Chen, a psychologist who specialized in trauma and foster care. She had heard about Morgan House through her professional network and asked to visit. She was maybe 45 with kind eyes and the calm presence of someone who had heard every story and still believed people could heal. She spent a day observing, talking to residents, watching how the program worked. That evening, she sat with me in the workshop after everyone else had gone to bed. What you are doing here is remarkable, she said, but I think you do not fully understand what you have created. I am just providing housing and teaching some basic skills, I said. No, Dr. Chen corrected gently. You are providing something much rarer. You are modeling healthy attachment. These young people have never had an adult consistently show up for them, believe in them, invest time and energy without expecting anything in return. You are teaching them that they are worth that investment. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But I am concerned about you. You are pouring everything into these residents. Who is pouring into you? The question caught me off guard. I have Marcus, I said, and the people in town. That is not what I mean, Dr. Chen said. You are 24 years old. You have built a house and started a nonprofit and changed lives. But when do you rest? When do you process your own trauma? When do you allow yourself to be something other than Julia Morgan, who saves people? I did not have an answer. Over the next few months, Dr. Chen became a regular presence at Morgan House. She offered free counseling to residents and, eventually, to me. In her small office in Charleston, I talked about things I had never spoken aloud, about what it felt like to grow up knowing you were unwanted, about the anger I still carried towards Sarah and David, about the fear that I was building Morgan House not to help others but to prove to myself that I was not like them, that I was better, that I would not fail the way they had failed. You are allowed to be angry, Dr. Chen told me during one session. You are allowed to grieve what you lost. Helping others does not require you to pretend your own pain does not exist. But if I let myself feel it, I said, I am afraid I will fall apart. So you work yourself to exhaustion instead, she observed. You build and build and build, just like David did, because if you stop moving, you might have to face what you are running from. She was right. I knew she was right. But knowing something and being able to change it are not the same thing. In May, I received a letter from the county commissioner. They had heard about Morgan House and wanted to tour the facility. They were impressed, the letter said, with the work we were doing. They wanted to discuss potential partnerships, possible funding, ways the county could support our mission. Marcus read the letter over my shoulder. David would have hated this, he said. All this attention. He always kept his head down, did his work, avoided the spotlight. David also died alone, I said, with a granddaughter he never met and a daughter he never reconciled with. Maybe keeping your head down is not always the right answer. The tour happened in June. A group of county officials and social workers walked through Morgan House, asking questions, taking notes. They interviewed the residents, they examined our workshop, they reviewed our budget and our outcomes. 2 weeks later, they offered us a grant, $50,000 a year for 3 years. Renewable after that based on results, enough to expand, enough to hire staff, enough to help more young people. I sat in David's cabin, now my cabin, with the grant letter in my hands, and I called Marcus. We need to build another house, I said. He laughed. Already? Already, I confirmed. There are too many kids who need this. 6 beds are not enough. Then we will build, Marcus said. That is what Morgans do. Construction on the second house started in July. This one was larger, designed to hold 8 residents with a dedicated classroom space and a bigger workshop. The county helped with permits, local contractors donated labor, the hardware store gave us materials at cost. Daniel came down from Pittsburgh and spent 2 weeks working alongside us. His wife brought their children, and I watched them play in the yard while we framed walls and hung trusses. This is what David wanted, Daniel said one evening. Not just houses, but homes. Not just structures, but communities. And people kept coming to help. On weekends, I would show up at the construction site and find a dozen volunteers already working. People who remembered David, people whose houses he had built, people who understood that what we were doing mattered. Christopher, my first resident, stayed on after completing the 6-month program. He moved into a small apartment in town and got a full-time job with a local construction company. But he came back to Morgan House every Saturday to help build and to mentor the newer residents. "You do not have to do this," I told him. "Yes, I do," he said. "You gave me a chance when nobody else would. This is how I pay it forward." During the construction, I noticed something changing in myself. The work was still hard, the days still long, but I was not working to exhaustion anymore. I was taking Dr. Chen's advice. I was allowing myself rest. I was learning that building something good did not require destroying myself in the process. One Saturday in late August, a woman showed up at the construction site. She was maybe 50, with graying hair and eyes that had seen hard things. She watched us work for a while before approaching me. "Are you Julia Morgan?" she asked. "I am." "My name is Patricia Kane," she said. Thomas Kane was my nephew. The name stopped me cold. Thomas Kane, my father. Patricia saw my reaction and nodded. "I heard about what you are doing here. I heard you are Sarah's daughter." She paused, her voice thick with emotion. "I am sorry we were not there for you. Thomas's family, we blamed Sarah when he died. We said terrible things. We were wrong." "You could not have known," I said. "But we could have tried," Patricia said. "We could have looked for Sarah, for you. Instead, we let our grief turn to anger, and we closed the door." She wiped her eyes. "Thomas would have been so proud of you. He would have loved watching you build." She reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. It showed a young man with an easel, painting in what looked like downtown Millbrook. His smile was bright, his eyes full of life. "This is your father," Patricia said. "The summer he came here, the summer he met your mother, I want you to have it." I took the photograph with shaking hands. For the first time, I was looking at the face of the man who had given me life. He looked happy. He looked like someone who loved fully and saw beauty everywhere. "Thank you," I said. It was not enough, but it was all I could manage. Patricia stayed for the rest of the day, working alongside us, telling me stories about Thomas, about his kindness, his talent, his dreams of being an artist who mattered. She told me he had wanted to teach art to kids who could not afford classes, that he believed everyone deserved access to beauty. "He sounds like he was a good person," I said. "He was," Patricia agreed, "and so was Sarah. I know that now. I am sorry it took me so long to see it." By September of 2016, exactly 25 years after I was born, the second house was finished. We had a bigger celebration this time. The county officials came. Local news ran a story. Patricia Kane attended, along with some of Thomas's other relatives who wanted to meet me, to apologize, to be part of something good. But the best part was watching the current residents of Morgan House walk through the new building, pointing out things they had helped build, talking about how many more people we would be able to help. That night, after everyone had gone home, I drove to the cemetery on the edge of town. I had been there once before, in March, when Marcus showed me where David was buried. A simple headstone, David Morgan, 1932 to 2010, builder. I sat on the ground next to the grave and pulled out two letters. One was Sarah's letter to David, the one she had written but never sent. The other was a letter I had written myself. I read Sarah's letter out loud, even though there was no one to hear it. I read about her apologies and her understanding, and her hope that maybe someday David and I would find each other. Then I read my own letter. "Dear Grandpa, I never got to meet you. You died 5 years before I found the chisel and followed it home to Millbrook. By the time I learned you existed, you were already gone. I am angry about that. I am angry that you knew about me for 12 years and never came to get me. I am angry that you let fear win, that you convinced yourself I was better off without you. I am angry that we lost so much time. But I am also grateful, because you left me something more valuable than money. You left me a trade. You left me a purpose. You left me an example of what it means to build something that matters. I finished the house you started. It took me 6 months, but I finished it. And then I turned it into something bigger. Morgan House is helping young people who aged out of foster care, people like me who needed someone to believe in them. We have helped 14 people so far. We have taught them to build, to believe in themselves, to understand that their past does not have to define their future. And we are just getting started. I think you would be proud. I think you would see that even though you failed Mom and you failed me, you also gave us something. You gave us resilience. You gave us the ability to take broken things and make them whole. Mom forgave you. She wrote you a letter saying so, but she never sent it. I am sending it now in my own way by reading it at your grave. I think you deserve to know that she understood, that she did not hate you, that she recognized herself in your mistakes. And I forgive you too. Not because what you did was okay. It was not okay. But because I understand now that you were doing the best you could with what you had. That is all any of us can do. Thank you for the chisel. Thank you for the workshop. Thank you for the unfinished house that became something more than either of us imagined. I am a Morgan. I am a builder. And I will make sure that name means something good. Your granddaughter, Julia. I folded both letters and placed them in a waterproof container. Then I dug a small hole at the base of David's headstone and buried the container there. I also placed the photograph of Thomas beside it, so my grandfather could finally see the young man his daughter had loved. The past could not be changed. Sarah and David would never get their reconciliation. I would never hear David's voice or feel Sarah's arms around me. Those chances were gone. But I could build something new. I could take the broken pieces of my inheritance and create something that helped people. I could make sure that other kids who aged out of foster care had what I never had, a place to land, a person to believe in them, a chance to build something better. That was the legacy, not money or property or even the houses themselves. The legacy was the belief that people mattered, that everyone deserved a chance, that you could fail 100 times and still build something good if you were willing to do the work. I drove back to Morgan House as the sun was setting. The two buildings stood side by side, lights on in the windows, smoke rising from the chimney where someone was making dinner. I could hear voices inside, laughter, the sound of people who had found a place to belong. Marcus's truck was in the driveway. He was sitting on the porch of the original house, the one I had built from David's foundation. Beside him sat Dr. Chen. The two of them engaged in quiet conversation. Thought I would find you here, Marcus said when I approached. Just saying goodbye, I said. To what? Dr. Chen asked. To the anger, I said. To the what-ifs. To the fantasy that things could have been different. Marcus nodded. That is good. That is healthy. But remember, you do not have to forget them to move forward. David and Sarah are part of you. Their mistakes, their strengths, their love, all of it. You get to decide what you keep and what you leave behind. We sat in silence for a while, watching the mountains turn purple in the fading light. Inside the house, I could hear Christopher helping one of the newer residents with homework. I could hear Kayla laughing at something someone said. I could hear the ordinary sounds of life being lived, of people who had been broken, finding ways to heal. What is next? Marcus asked. I have been thinking about that, I said. There are other towns like Millbrook, other kids aging out of foster care with nowhere to go. What if we could teach other people to do what we are doing here? What if Morgan House could be a model? Marcus smiled. Now you are thinking like a builder, he said, always looking at the next project. Is that wrong? No, he said. It is exactly right. You build one house, then another, then another. You do not stop just because one project is finished. You keep building as long as there is need, and you have the strength to swing a hammer. And maybe, I said quietly, maybe while I am building for others, I can also build for myself. Maybe I can allow myself to have a life beyond this work. Dr. Chen reached over and squeezed my hand. That would be healthy, she said. You deserve that. 6 months later, I gave my first workshop on starting a transitional home for foster youth. 20 people attended, social workers and nonprofit directors, and regular people who wanted to help. I taught them about licensing and funding and programming. But mostly I taught them about showing up, about being present, about believing that people could change if given the chance. One of the attendees was a man from a town 3 hours south. He had aged out of foster care himself 20 years earlier. He had built a successful construction business and wanted to give back. 6 months after that workshop, he opened a transitional home modeled on Morgan House. Then another one opened in Pennsylvania. Then another in Ohio. People started calling me, asking for advice, wanting to learn. The model was spreading. I was 25 years old. I had aged out of foster care 2 years earlier with nothing but a chisel and $58. Now I ran 2 transitional homes, employed 4 staff members, including Dr. Chen as our counselor, and was training people across 3 states to do the same work. But the best part was not the growth or the recognition or the sense of accomplishment. The best part was watching Christopher teach a new resident how to use a circular saw. It was seeing Kayla come back from her first semester of trade school, bursting with excitement about what she was learning. It was Marcus the Younger getting his welding certification and buying his first car. It was Jessica enrolling in community college. It was David getting his GED and dreaming about becoming a teacher. Every single person who came through Morgan House left with skills, with hope, with the belief that they could build a life worth living. One evening in late October, I sat in the workshop alone, the same workshop where David had spent 48 years building houses. It was quiet, peaceful, the kind of quiet that comes from work well done rather than loneliness. I pulled out the chisel, the one David had made in 1962, the one Sarah had carried when she left, the one that had found its way back home. The wood handle was worn smooth from decades of use. The blade was still sharp. The initials DM were carved deep enough that they would last another 60 years. I pulled out a piece of wood and a small knife. Carefully, precisely, I carved my own initials below David's, JM, and below that, the year. Divitux Seshbatsmitais. Someday maybe someone else would hold this chisel. Maybe someone I helped at Morgan House. Maybe someone who came after, continuing the work, building on the foundation we had laid. They would see these initials and they would know they came from something. They would know they had a legacy to uphold. I set the chisel on the workbench and looked around the workshop. 54 years of history in this building. Thousands of hours of work. Hundreds of houses built. Countless lives touched. And now it was mine to carry forward. Not as a burden, but as a gift. Not as something I had to do, but as something I chose to do. I thought about the question Marcus had asked me months ago. Who are you building this for? I finally had an answer. I was building for the kid who would walk out of foster care next year with nothing but a backpack and $50 and fear in their heart. I was building for the young person who thought they had no future, no worth, no one who cared if they succeeded or failed. I was building for every child who had been told they were unwanted, every teenager who had been abandoned, every young adult who had aged out alone. I was building for Sarah, who had tried and failed but never stopped loving. I was building for David, who had made terrible mistakes but never stopped trying to make them right. I was building for Thomas, who had died before he could meet his daughter, but who had loved beauty and believed everyone deserved access to it. And I was building for myself, for the girl who had spent 23 years wondering where she came from and whether she mattered, for the woman who was learning slowly that she could be both broken and whole, both angry and forgiving, both haunted by the past and building toward a future. I mattered. They mattered. We all mattered. And we built. We built because that is what Morgans do. We take broken things and make them whole. We take empty spaces and fill them with something that lasts. We fail and get up and try again. We make mistakes and spend years trying to fix them. We love imperfectly, but we love. The chisel sat on the workbench, waiting for the next project, the next person, the next generation. The workshops would continue. The houses would keep rising. The young people would keep coming, and we would keep showing up to meet them. Because in the end, that is what legacy really means. Not the things we build, but the people we build them for. Not the mistakes we make, but what we do to make them right. Not the time we waste, but the time we redeem. My name is Julia Morgan. I am 25 years old. I am a builder, a teacher, a survivor, a work in progress. And I am just getting started.